You're with the live desk here on GB News with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. Coming up, Deputy Prime Minister's questions live from the House of Commons.
Yes, the Deputy stepping in for the second week in a row. The Prime Minister is at the NATO summit in Vilnius, holding a key meeting indeed this morning with Ukrainian leader President Zelenskyy. So some very important matters discussed there. We'll keep you updated on what the Prime Minister and President Zelenskyy has had to say.
Back here in the UK, Labour's Rachel Reeves and Lisa Nandy are meeting mortgage brokers as the housing crisis grows. And
as you can see here, Liz Truss launching the Growth Commission today. What exactly is it? And why does the former Prime Minister believe that she's still right on the economy? Our economics and business editor Liam Halligan asking her in an exclusive interview.
We're joined in the studio by our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, to talk about Deputy PMQs, of course. Rishi Sunak is in Lithuania. How lively do you think it will get today between Angela Rayner and Oliver Dowden?
Well, it did get a little bit spicy last week, didn't it, when the same two characters were appearing across these dispatch boxes. And this is the first time since these Prime Minister's questions have been televised that we have back-to-back Deputy Prime Minister's questions. No doubt that will be referenced in the opening stages. Rishi Sunak missing two in a row. He's becoming known as someone who perhaps doesn't enjoy standing behind that dispatch box as much as maybe some of his predecessors did.
80% attendance rating, I think, compared to other Prime Ministers.
Indeed, and a good look. Slipping. Perhaps it was interesting actually last week to look at the makeup of the chamber behind Rishi Sunak. Fewer and fewer Conservative MPs choosing to turn up to these sessions. Lots of gaps on those benches, despite the Conservative Party still having a majority numerically. More and more people staying away.
However, one might imagine, he's got a good excuse this week. I'm at the NATO summit and I'm meeting President Zelenskyy sorting out the war in Ukraine. So difficult attack line for Angela Rayner on that particular
Some might argue these international meetings are more important than attending a birthday party for the NHS, which was, of course, last week.
Exactly. Just round the corner, indeed, from the House of Commons.
Indeed, a 5-minute walk. But of course, the leader of the opposition at that point was away as well. So perhaps we can't pin this all on Rishi Sunak, as some commentators have in terms of his aversion to this sort of theatre.
Twice on the bounce, they were talking about housing, lack of housing, house building. Oh, I think Lindsay Hoyle has just got up on his feet. We'll go to
number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy PMQs now, I think.
Mr. Speaker,
let's listen in.
I have been asked to reply. Global oil prices have remained largely stable this year. This has not changed following the announcement of additional production cuts by Saudi Arabia and Russia. We expect the impact of the cuts will be mitigated by the increase in supply from other producers and a decrease in global oil demand, as we have seen previously.
Stephen Bullner. Speaker, if we want to insulate ourselves from future price rises, then we need to invest in a greener future. The United States gets it. They've committed $370 billion on net zero energies. The EU, they get it. They're set to match that figure. And in Scotland, we get it. We have the ambition to lead the world on renewable energy. We have the energy, but we do not have the power. So why is Westminster trying to block Scotland's path to a safer, greener future?
Deputy Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, we of course will continue to invest in renewables, but I would say to the party opposite, we should also invest in our energy independence, and that means investing in the North Sea. If we fail to invest in the North Sea, we'll be more reliant on foreign producers and we will have higher carbon emissions as we import from elsewhere.
Craig McKinley.
Question 2, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is in Vilnius attending the NATO summit. This summit is an opportunity to build on the work we have done over the past year, strengthening NATO and supporting Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, in addition to my meetings in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
McKinley.
Mr. Speaker. New Labour's old mantra used to be education, education, education. Its new one seems to be tax education, tax education, tax education. Does the Deputy Prime Minister share my disgust at Labour's plans to tax education and choice, which could lead to 40,000 pupils being sent into the state sector with the cost to the taxpayer? I have a number of English language schools in my constituency, and they are concerned that this will apply to them as well as tuition, out-of-hours tuition, and sports training additionally. Does the Deputy Prime Minister object to these measures as strongly as I do?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Yes, well, once again, we have seen from the Labour Party them putting the politics of envy above the interests of children in this country. And as my honourable friend rightly highlights, recent analysis shows this could lead to over 40,000 pupils leaving the schools they're in, placing further burdens on existing schools and costing £300 million.
We now come to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know you're a keen historian, so I looked up the last time a Prime Minister missed 2 sessions in a row with other engagements, which was March 1996. And I'm very proud to be filling the boots of Lord John Prescott. But I think it's safe to say he's no Heseltine, Mr. Speaker. Why is it John Prescott asked that in Tory Britain, tens of thousands of families are facing repossession, negative equity and homelessness? And can he tell us, 27 years later, why I'm having to ask the same question?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, clearly the Right Honourable Lady did not listen to my previous comments. The Prime Minister is at NATO. Of course, that wouldn't be a problem if she'd had her way. Her old boss wanted to abandon Ukraine, abolish the army and withdraw from NATO, and he certainly wouldn't be going to any summit, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to house building, I will take no lectures from the party opposite on home ownership. My parents would not have been able to buy their own home if it were not for Margaret Thatcher and the reforms introduced by her government, and this government is building on those with record house building.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, I think he's taken lessons from the former Prime Minister on telling the facts. The last Labour government worked hard to dramatically reduce the number of children in temporary accommodation. But under the Tories, the number of homeless children has risen by 75%. I'm proud of our record on tackling child poverty. Does the Right Honourable Gentleman feel ashamed of his?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I'll tell you what this government has done. We've lifted 400,000 children out of child poverty. We have introduced the national living wage, something the party opposite totally failed to do, and increased the national living wage by the largest amount ever, meaning £1,800 for working people, and cutting their taxes by doubling the personal allowance. That is the surest way to ensure we lift people out of poverty, and would never have happened with the party opposite.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, it's like the ghost of Prime Minister past is still here. And I tell the Right Honourable Gentleman that he should be careful about the stats he used, because the Children's Commissioner warned the other Prime Minister about peddling false narrative on child poverty around those figures. The truth is, rising bills and soaring mortgages and plummeting real wages are pushing more and more families to the brink. Those already struggling are being hit hardest by the Tory mortgage bombshell and rising food costs. So can he tell us how many primary school children have been pushed into poverty since his government took power?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I would say to the Right Honourable Lady, it is this party, not the party opposite, which extended free school meals to all 5, 6 and 7-year-olds, something the party opposite failed to do, and it sits alongside many measures we are taking to help people with the cost of living. We are paying half of families' energy bills last winter, funded by our 75% windfall tax, freezing fuel duty, helping families with childcare, and delivering on our pledge to reduce the debt. It may come as a surprise to the Right Honourable Lady, but balancing the books means more than working out how many more millions to take from her union paymasters.
Mr. Speaker, once again, he talks about balancing the books. His party crashed the economy. And he seems to be completely oblivious to what it's like for working people in this country at the moment. New research out today shows that 400,000 more primary school-aged children are growing up in poverty since his government came to office. Why does he think that is?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I would take absolutely no lectures whatsoever from the party opposite about how we help children in the most need. It is record investment from this government in education, £2 billion more this year, £2 billion next year, which is giving those very children the best possible start in life, ensuring that we have the highest reading standards in the Western world. And I have to say to the Honourable Lady, listen, her leader says he hates tree huggers. They seem very keen on hugging that magic money tree.
Mr. Speaker, he doesn't even acknowledge it, let alone explain why child poverty is rising. What hope has he got of solving it? So let me try a simpler question for him. How many kids don't have a permanent address today compared to when Labour left office in 2010?
Deputy Prime Minister.
We can exchange all these numbers across the dispatch box. Mr. Speaker, these are the numbers that matter. There are 1.7 million fewer people in absolute poverty under this government, 400,000 fewer children, 200,000 fewer pensioners, and 1 million fewer people of working age, because the single best route out of poverty is a job, and record numbers of people, 4 million more people under this government have got a job. That is the difference between this party and the party opposite, who always leave office with unemployment higher.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, what matters is what people feel every single day at the moment, who are going to work and can't afford their mortgage, can't afford their rent and can't afford their bills because of this Conservative government. There are 55,000 more children without a permanent address today compared to when they took office 13 years ago. We've gone from a Labour cabinet focused on tackling child poverty to Tory ministers who won't even admit the problem. Just like the Question Time in March 1996, they can only offer excuses and not answers. Lord John Prescott said to Lord Michael Heseltine that day, "How can the right honourable gentleman be so complacent in the face of sheer misery created by his government's policies?" 27 years on, why are we asking the exact same thing?
A little bit more if we carry on. Come on, Deputy Prime.
Mr. Speaker, I know there's a reshuffle coming up on the other side, but this audition for John Prescott's old job is just getting a little bit hackneyed. It is this government that has lifted 400,000 children out of poverty. The party opposite, I hear the right lady, claiming to be the party of working people, but under their policies, people can't even get to work. They support Just Stop Oil protesters blocking our roads. They support their union paymasters stopping our trains. And, of course, they support the hated ULEZ stopping cars across our capital. While Conservatives get Britain moving, Labour are standing in everyone's way.
Mr. Speaker, given the Mansion House Compact does not encourage our pension funds to invest specifically in British companies, what more can the government do to encourage greater investment in our companies, especially the climate technology startups, which are increasingly going abroad to find the funding they require to the benefit of our competitors?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I think my honourable friend raises a very important point about both start-up capital and ensuring that we get more money to high-growth companies. I would say that the Chancellor's Pension Compact is a very important step forward and will unlock £75 billion of additional investment. I'm quite confident large amounts of that will go to UK companies, and that sits alongside measures such as the Edinburgh reforms to financial services, again, which will help improve financial services in this country and unlock money for those industries.
SNP Deputy Leader Murray Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, the Deputy Prime Minister dismissed warnings from these benches that mortgage rates were nearly back to where they were after the disastrous mini-budget. This week, mortgage rates have surpassed those levels. How high do they need to go until he and his government takes it seriously?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady knows, people around the world know, that the driver of higher mortgage rates is higher inflation. And higher inflation is caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the post-COVID supply chains. But what we have to do is make sure we halve inflation. It's only by getting inflation under control that we will be able to get mortgage rates down, and that requires discipline. Discipline on spending, discipline on public sector pay, and discipline on energy supply, all of which is lacking from that party.
Murray Black.
Bank of England predict that mortgage payments will rise by at least £500 for 1 million households. The Prime Minister says that people need to hold their nerve. The Chancellor said just last night that mortgage holders should just shop around. Speaking of his own party, the member for South West Devon said, if the circus doesn't stop by Christmas, it's over. Does the Deputy Prime Minister understand that people can't afford to wait until Christmas and that they need help right now?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the fundamental thing we have to do is to halve inflation. That is an approach that the IMF, quote, strongly endorses, because higher inflation drives higher mortgage rates. But that's not all we are doing. With the Mortgage Charter, signed up by 90% of mortgage providers, we are giving people help to extend their terms, to go interest only, and to reduce their monthly payments. Now, that action is supported by Martin Lewis, a real money-saving expert, unlike the big spenders on those benches.
Stevenson.
Last year I visited Abbeyfield House in Wentzfield, and I was impressed by this model of assisted living for older people that gave them the independence of a self-contained flat but the ability to eat and socialise together. I was deeply concerned to hear that a consultation is underway to close the Abbeyfield House in Wentzfield, and I went back to speak to older people. They unanimously want to stay there. Abbeyfield is a charity. His Majesty the King has been patron for 40 years now. It cannot meet the cost of updating the estate to meet environmental standards. Will my right honourable friends meet with me to see what support government can offer to Abbeyfield so that my residents don't have to leave the homes they love?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, I'm very happy to give my honourable friend that assurance. I would note that we have provided £7.5 billion of additional funding for social care and discharge, and specifically on energy. We have got an energy advice service to support smaller businesses, and we'll be piloting new audit and grant schemes which may also help.
Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In January, Emily booked an appointment with her local dentist in Chard, Somerset, for the 14th of June, only to be told by a neighbour at the end of May that the surgery had closed in April. Emily no longer has a dentist. All the remaining surgeries aren't taking on any new patients. Emily doesn't know what to do. So can the Deputy Prime Minister tell Emily and millions of people like her when can they get an appointment with a local NHS dentist?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, the right honourable gentleman may have missed, but our NHS workforce plan is investing an extra £2.4 billion into training and retaining crucial NHS staff, including dentists and GPs. And actually, the number of dentists will rise by 40%. And I would say to people across that constituency that the best way they can ensure better services for their NHS is to vote for Faye Purbrick, the Conservative candidate.
Charles.
Mr. Speaker, could the Deputy Prime Minister let us know when we can expect allocations from the Levelling Up Fund round 3? And when it comes, will it be true to the Prime Minister's pledge that all parts of the country will benefit, including the South East and most particularly the very deserving town of Andover?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, as well as being an excellent minister, I know how committed my right honourable friend is to the town of Andover. We will shortly be announcing the new approach to the third round, and further details of this approach will follow shortly.
Pete Wishart.
Mr. Speaker, there's some things you encounter in political life that's certain to horrify, appall, or sicken you. But I don't think I've ever seen anything quite so grotesque as the painting over of Mickey Mouse on a children's mural, as was done by the Home Office in a detention centre in Kent. Now, no minister so far has roused the necessary compassion or concern to speak out about this. So can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister to look into the deeper recesses of his soul and just simply condemn it?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I'll tell the honourable gentleman what real compassion looks like, and that means stopping the vile people smuggling trade across the Channel, condemning women and children to death. This government is taking action to deal with it with our Stop the Boats bill, and that party shamefully 18 times last night voted against it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. On these benches, we know, as the party of aspiration, the importance of home ownership. According to a recent estimate by Barclays Bank, it now takes an average of 8 years for the average first-time buyer to save for a deposit. And in parts of London and the South East, it can be longer than that. What is the Deputy Prime Minister and the government doing in order to improve the prospects for younger people who want to own their own homes?
Prime Minister.
Well, I know what a passionate champion of this issue my honourable friend is. It is actually the case that almost 850,000 households have been helped purchase a home since 2010. And actually in 2021, the number of people getting onto the property ladder for the first time was at a 20-year high, thanks to initiatives such as First Homes and the Help to Buy scheme. Of course, that stands in contrast to the party opposite, who oversaw the lowest level of house building since the 1920s.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With rising ticket prices, many of my constituents find they can get the best value fare by going to the staff ticket office at Lancaster Station. It's perhaps why so many of them have signed my petition to save staffing at Lancaster Station. So can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister, is the closure of ticket offices just yet another cost of living bombshell hitting my hard-working constituents?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, it is important that the railways continue to reform after the record amount of money that we gave them during COVID. I would gently say to the Honourable Lady that if she's concerned about her constituents getting anywhere on the railways, she should condemn the totally unjustified strikes which close them down week after week.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 4 summers ago, the unprecedented climate change-driven heatwave caused irreparable damage to Chelmsford's flyover. And since then, people from all across Essex have been stuck in Chelmsford, traffic jams, wasting time, hitting our economic growth. We badly need a new junction at the Army and Navy, but the funding decision has been stuck in Whitehall. So will my right honourable friend use his powerful cross-cabinet convening powers to get Treasury and Transport to agree to the money so we can deliver a new junction, stop the traffic jams and get Chelmsford moving again?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I know how powerfully my right honourable friend makes the case for this scheme, and she has done so once again in the Chamber. The Chancellor was sitting next to me and would also have heard the case. I understand that the outline case, business case submitted by Essex County Council is being considered by ministers right now, and all relevant ministers will have heard her injunction.
Castle.
Scottish Ambulance Service statistics showed an increase in hypothermic call-outs of over 30% across Scotland last winter and a staggering 84% in the north in December. Whilst fuel calls have fallen slightly, food and other costs have risen exponentially. To end the perversity of energy-rich Scotland seeing 1/3 of Scots in fuel poverty and literally freezing, when will the government bring in a social tariff to ensure that the poor and vulnerable can get through this winter without calling out the ambulance service because they're freezing?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, as my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, set out in the autumn statement, we are exploring the best approach to consumer protection from April 2024 as part of wider retail market reforms. I would just reiterate to the honourable gentleman that this winter we paid half of energy bills in Scotland. That was thanks to the strength of our union.
Sir Oliver Dowden there, Deputy Prime Minister. Just to remind you, of course, this is Deputy Prime Minister's questions because, as Mr Dowden patiently explained, the Prime Minister is in Vilnius for the NATO summit. So Angela Rayner was against him on the other side of the Commons at the issue of March 1996. Quite a clever device by Angela Rayner, recalling Lord John Prescott and Lord Heseltine. And she said, why did I have to ask the same question on repossessions and homelessness 27 years later? Our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, perhaps not remembering those days because he's a mere stripling of a lad, but a clever device by Angela Rayner, I thought.
A very clever device, and within it, a reference to a very, very famous debate moment in the United States. 1988, the vice presidential debate, where the vice presidential nominee from the Democratic side had been sort of batting forward and back about Dan Quayle, who was the Republican candidate's suitability due to his age. He referenced how Jack Kennedy was young as well, and at this point, the most amazing line in the debate comes: Senator, I worked with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. And Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine, and Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
You're no Jack Kennedy.
And in the same way that Angela Rayner said, you're no John Prescott, or no, what is it? You're no Michael Heseltine.
He's no Heseltine, I think, speaking to Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker. But it's returning to familiar ground from last week's clash at the dispatch box. And I guess people will be a bit confused about where we are in the debate, because we had this figure of 400,000 that Oliver Dowden said had, in terms of the children raised out of poverty. And then Angela Rayner came back and said, well, no, our figures suggest there are 400,000 more children in poverty. So it's a sort of clash of statistics almost, wasn't it?
It is, and we'll have to wait for the fact-checkers to really drill down into these different numbers. It could be that one of these numbers is going against a trend of where the number would have been versus where it is now, and one is an absolute difference. Or perhaps this is about a percentage terms disagreement government as well. There are lots of different ways that politicians, of course, interpret numbers.
Yeah, because Dowden said 400,000 fewer children, but fewer compared to what?
Exactly.
Guess,
is that fewer compared to the previous trend, or fewer compared to the absolute number?
Good point.
So they could well be both right in their contradictory numbers.
There's the thing. Yeah. But I'm just wondering about the delivery then, in terms of his line that he tried about hugging the magic money tree. Didn't really come off.
Dire. That I could almost hear the groans from not just the press gallery,
You
but
nearly
no doubt
spat your coffee out, to be fair, Tom.
It was a terrible line.
It's all in the timing. Yes.
All in the delivery. Yeah. It's interesting. Dowden seemed to be on the back foot for that entire 6-question exchange with Angela Rayner. There were issues of housing, which have come up again and again now at Prime Minister's and Deputy Prime Minister's questions, where the Labour Party is really on the front foot and the government on the back foot due to its policy changes in this area. But it was interesting. When the SNP questions came up, Dowden seemed to have found his authority. He delivered that line about how inflation is the real issue and what it requires is discipline. And he said discipline 3 times, thumping his hand on the dispatch box as he said it. At that moment, I think he garnered more authority in the chamber than he had when he was trying to deliver.
And an indication,
really
perhaps, because he was expecting the mortgage question from Angela Rayner, maybe.
Yes. Perhaps. This seemed like something that he had prepared for. Yeah. He had a strong line on it, and whether you agree or disagree with the content, the delivery was, I think, his peak in this entire 30 minutes.
Interesting to note as well that, yet again, there was a lot of gaps on the benches for this, for the 3rd week running.
3rd week running now. We can say we are getting towards the end of term. MPs go on holiday next week. Perhaps some have jetted off early to various parts of the world, or perhaps, no doubt, they would be saying they're working hard in their constituencies. But also, we can't forget, there are 5 by-elections upcoming. And what we have seen in recent weeks is a lot of MPs being in the chamber less, being in Parliament less, because they're doing the knocking on the doors, treading the feet across the pavements, wearing the leather in their shoes thin.
Yeah, there was also an interesting question. I'm not sure, you might be able to tell me which MP asked it, about, which is all linked to the whole illegal migration, the illegal migration bill that's going on. But what has caused a lot of consternation is the painting over the mural at the processing centre, making children feel so unwelcome here. I mean, the government is facing a lot of criticism for that, and I'm not sure Oliver Dowden's response particularly justified it.
No, it's very peculiar because the government really doesn't seem to have a line on this. They tend to obfuscate and switch to other issues, how much they're spending to help children and all the rest of it. But it's not the children. If there are unaccompanied children or even accompanied children, it's not necessarily the young children who have chosen to get in those boats. Yeah. So I think wherever you stand on the issue of boats, on both sides of the House, on both sides of the debate, it does seem curious that a deterrent by taking away a picture of Mickey Mouse doesn't really seem like much of a deterrent at all.
Yeah, and Dowden coming back, I'll tell you what real compassion looks like, and then obviously indicating that the other party had voted 18 times against the bill coming back from the Lords. Where are we? Just to explain to people, we've got this process, what they call ping-pong.
Yes.
Where it goes from the Lords to the Commons and back again.
And of course, it has to pass both houses in order to then achieve royal assent and become law. There were 20 amendments made by the Lords when it passed through that chamber last week or the week before. Last night, it, of course, came back to the Commons, and the government wanted to reject 15 of those amendments and accept 5 of them in some form. Some
unaccompanied children, for instance.
Unaccompanied children, for instance, the amount of time that pregnant women can be detained, but also the retrospective nature of the bill. The bill originally wanted all of its measures to be applied from the moment it was introduced. Now it has been amended to say that they'll only be applied from the moment at which it achieves royal assent. So that's a difference of, if we're counting the numbers, about 10,000 people who have come across in the intervening weeks who this bill will now not apply to. But the government passed all of its votes in the Commons last night. It won every single vote. And that means the bill now goes back to the Lords, where they might well accept what the government has done because the government's accepted some of those amendments. No doubt there have been behind-the-scenes conversations, horse trading going on here, because the government reportedly, and they won't admit this publicly, but reportedly really wants this bill passed by the end of this parliamentary session, and that means next.
But they wouldn't give that guarantee, would they?
No.
The question, and certainly Suella Braverman was looking pretty stony-faced there on the front.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the things is the government doesn't want to look like it's under time pressure.
Right.
If it looks like it's under time pressure, then the Lords might well be able to squeeze more concessions out of the government. And, of course, the government only holds 1/3 of the seats in the House of Lords. 2/3 of seats are held by Labour, Lib Dem and crossbench peers, which means that the government is really on the back foot anyway. Insisting that they've got some sort of time pressure deadline in negotiations might not be their strongest card.
So theoretically, this ping-pong could just go on and on and on and on and on.
It could, although ultimately the government could use something called the Parliament Act, which asserts the authority of the Commons, but it takes a lot of time to do that. So generally what happens is the Lords does roll over after a bit of this because they accept they are the unelected House. They don't want to assert their authority too much and create a constitutional crisis. So they never want to, so they wouldn't reject a bill outright that has come from the Commons. But what they can do is amend and revise and change in some ways, and we're seeing that now.
Tom, while you're here, we'll touch on something else, and we'll speak to Catherine Foster in more detail outside the High Court on this. But there's a hearing underway regards Wethersfield Airfield, where people may be more familiar with it as RAF Scampton, of course, the Dam Busters RAF base. Now, the High Court hearing with the legal action against the Home Office has heard that the first asylum seekers have already been moved onto the airfield, according to the KC in the hearing. Now, this is one of those issues where you have a microcosm of the whole question on asylum seekers and migrants and so on that could actually, if you pardon the expression, blow up in the government's face.
It could. Now, ultimately, the government has been under so much pressure over what are known as migrant hotels. Hotels in many, for example, seaside places in the United Kingdom that have been entirely taken over by the government to house migrants. The government thinks that's an unacceptable situation. The local communities think it's an unacceptable situation.
But we heard yesterday about all these thousands of hotel rooms that are being kept
just in case there's this
yes.
And actually, going back to the illegal migration bill, this is one of the reasons why they wanted the retrospective action within the bill. They're worried that if there isn't that retrospective action, there'll be a surge of people coming over up until the bill is passed.
Right.
Because one of the main points about the bill is there will be no ability to apply to stay, but if that only applies to people who come after it achieves royal assent, there may well be this last-minute surge of lots and lots of boats coming over if they hear the bill is close to passing. And to some extent, that is one of the theories as to why the government has booked out all of these rooms in case.
OK. Tom, thank you for that. Just to bring you up to date on that, so we've got this underway in the High Court. Braintree District Council bringing legal action against the Home Office over the proposed use of that RAF airfield to accommodate up to 1,700 asylum seekers, male asylum seekers, for 180 days each. That's ongoing. We'll have an update with our correspondent, Catherine Forster, from outside the High Court shortly. Stay with us.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. More heavy showers to come today. There'll be some blue sky at times, a fairly cool breeze continuing to blow. We've still got low pressure dominating. It's only slowly pulling away to the northeast, and around it, bands of showers continually feeding in. Some heavy ones today across northern Scotland, particularly parts of Aberdeenshire down to Fife, but also parts of Northern Ireland, southern Scotland seeing some intense showers. And further south, we'll see kind of lines of showers, so some places having a very wet day, whereas some spots may not see too many and see a bit more in the way of sunshine. There's still a cool breeze blowing though, so temperatures only around or a touch below average, high teens, low 20s at best. And feeling cooler when the showers come along, of which there will still be plenty through this evening. Still some pretty lively ones, the possibility of a rumble of thunder in places, but they do tend to fade as we go through the night, so most places will become dry through the early hours. Some showers keeping going around the west. Temperatures holding up 11 to 14 Celsius. Thursday, well, it is sunshine and showers, but I don't think there'll be as many showers tomorrow. A better chance of seeing a bit more sunshine, particularly initially over central and eastern parts. But even through the day, not as many showers developing. Parts of Wales, southwest England especially, may stay dry. Still some heavy showers to come, particularly in parts of Scotland, and still generally on the cool side, although the winds will be a little lighter tomorrow.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GBNews.
Hello, you're watching The Live Desk with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson. The battle over the decision to house asylum seekers on old RAF bases is continuing as the High Court hears numerous bids to bring legal action against plans to house migrants on disused air bases at RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire and Wethersfield in Essex, where the first asylum seekers have been moved onto the site.
Yes, that news coming from the High Court in the last few minutes. Well, the challenges following a prolonged session in the House of Commons last night, Tory MPs overturning many of the Lords' amendments on the controversial illegal migration bill, but all not smooth sailing. The government facing a backbench revolt for many senior Tories, including former Prime Minister Theresa May, criticising the impact on victims of what she said was modern-day slavery.
Our political reporter, Catherine Forster, joins us now. Good afternoon, Catherine. Bring us up to speed, then, with what the High Court has been hearing. The first asylum seekers, they have been moved onto that airfield in Essex, which is more commonly known as RAF Scampton.
Yes, that's right. The hearing was delayed initially for about 45 minutes. There were so many people wanting to be there, they had to find a bigger court. And there are 3 appeals going forward over the next couple of days, trying to get permission for a judicial review against the government's plans to site migrants on 2 former RAF bases. Those are Wethersfield in Essex and Scampton in Lincolnshire. Now, we began with the appeal from an individual in Wethersfield and the KC saying that migrants have begun arriving there and being accommodated on that base. Now, locals are bitterly unhappy, as is Braintree Council. Eventually, the plans are to house 1.7 thousand male migrants there who will be free to come and go as they like. The appeal is saying that basically the government is using this temporary permitted development rights and that they are concealing their plans for how long they plan to use the base for, that it's not appropriate, that they don't have the infrastructure. What about GPs? What about hospitals? What about the pressure on all the local people in the surrounding area? And we expect to hear similar a little bit later about Scampton in Lincolnshire, which of course was the base for the dam busters. They also used to have the Red Arrows there. And again, great unhappiness for plans. The first migrants currently are expected to arrive there in August. So this is a 2-day hearing. We don't know yet whether we'll get the judgment tomorrow or at a later date. But time really is of the essence because, as we've heard, migrants are arriving in Essex right now.
And that in itself, of course, raises a quite interesting legal question, you know, the cart before the horse. If the migrants are already there, how does an injunction work to actually stop them arriving?
Exactly, and the lawyer was saying, you know, well, what will happen if this is successful? Are migrants going to be made homeless? The onus then, he was suggesting, would fall on local authorities. He was also saying, is this a change of approach from the government? He's saying, you know, previously the policy was one of dispersal and integration, putting them up in hotels, them becoming integrated, whereas now the government's seeming to favour putting them on disused military bases, keeping them effectively segregated, though of course they can come and go. And he was saying, well, you know, is this a national change of policy? And again, querying the legality of that.
OK, Catherine, for the moment, thank you for that. Back to you, of course, as those KCs argue it out. We'll see where we are by the end of the court case today, at least.
Look at the damage done. Those are the words of TV and radio host Jeremy Vine about the unnamed BBC presenter, as the number of allegations made has now risen to 4.
Well, the presenter suspended over the weekend. The Met Police saying it's now inquiring whether a criminal offence has been committed. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has the latest from Broadcasting House on, I think, 3 or 4 allegations, it seems, at the moment. Certainly, Mark.
Yeah, there are 4 sets of allegations, revelations, whatever you want to describe them as, relating to 4 different people. The first, of course, the allegations that we're familiar with, that the Sun splashed with last Friday, the claims about a young person who the parents of that young person had told the paper had been approached by this presenter and had been asked to supply illicit pictures, had been paid amounts of money for that. That is subject, as you mentioned there in your introduction, to a police investigation, potentially, that's still ongoing. It's called a scoping exercise at the moment that Scotland Yard is doing to ascertain really if there is any potential criminality here, and if they believe that there is, then a criminal investigation could well follow. Then, of course, we got the other sets of allegations, revelations that came yesterday with the BBC reporting that the person had suggested that they had met the presenter on a dating app, that they had then come under pressure to meet the presenter, but hadn't, but then also said, because they had suggested that they might reveal who the presenter was online, that they had then been threatened with a number of messages that were threatening and abusive and expletive-laden. Followed on by the Sun newspaper, again reporting today another 2 sets of allegations relating to another 2 people. One of those individuals said that they had met the presenter on a dating app and that actually had met the presenter in person during the 3rd COVID lockdown, which was in February of 2021. So that's where we are at the moment. All of these allegations swirling around. We still don't know who the presenter is, or at least we're not, under privacy laws, able to name that presenter, and so colleagues are now starting to come out and call on this presenter to do that, to come forward. The latest being Jeremy Vine, who of course tweeted about this last night, then again today on his Channel 5 programme gave these very strong words to his colleague. This is what he said.
It's his decision, but he needs to come forward now, I think. I know his survival instinct has kicked in, and I know he saw what happened to Philip Schofield, but my God, look at the damage to the BBC. Look at the damage to his friends, to those falsely accused, and the longer he leaves it, the worse it will be for him.
Mark, very interesting what Jeremy Vine says there, and he's not the only one to say that this individual should unmask himself, if you like. But Jeremy Vine is not a lawyer, and there are media lawyers who are saying, no, he does not have to do this. He has a right to privacy. He has not been charged with any criminal offence.
Yes, and although Jeremy Vine and some others are suggesting that this presenter should come forward and speak publicly, as you say, it's not just the lawyers. There are other colleagues and former colleagues who are suggesting or saying that, yes, as you suggest there, the allegations have not been tested in any way, shape or form, really, so we don't know if there is either criminality or indeed inappropriate behaviour that might require some kind of sanction. Given that the presenter should not come forward. In fact, we heard from presenter Richard Bacon replying directly to Jeremy Vine and just saying, stop it, you know, that this person is entitled to their privacy. And we heard from John Sopel, who is also a former BBC presenter until recently, now of course has a series of podcasts on the Global Radio Network, saying that they are aware that this presenter, this unnamed presenter, is very angry at the way that they have been portrayed in the Sun newspaper, that they believe that the Sun is just out there actively digging dirt now to further damage his reputation. So lots of people saying lots of different things, and we're kind of stuck in a limbo where many people who have been on social media will be aware of names that are out there. It's completely unsatisfactory, but privacy laws mean that this person, of course, is entitled to privacy. We can't legally name this person, and so there we are.
And Mark, as you've been speaking, we've seen BBC staffers going in and out their new broadcasting house. I don't know if you managed to actually just speak to any of those to gauge the temperature, because one of the other things that Jeremy Vine asserted was that the BBC is on its knees, and one wonders what's going on just in terms of the day-to-day running of the corporation.
Yeah, I mean, there might be a bit of hyperbole there, to be honest. I speak to people because I have friends that work at the BBC, and yes, of course, there are people that are very angry, not just potentially at a colleague who might have brought the corporation into disrepute, and I say might have, because, as I say, the allegations have not been properly investigated and tested at this point, but I think also angry just at the way in which, of course, the BBC is being battered and battered and battered by the latest revelations. Some of them, it has to be said, coming, of course, from their own newsroom, who are independent of the corporate structure here and, just like us, are independently pursuing this story and speaking to people. It was, in fact, them, BBC News, that is, that broke the story late yesterday afternoon about that second person that had come forward to allege that they had been the subject of some threatening and abusive and expletive-laden messages from that presenter.
Mark, outside New Broadcasting House, thanks very much indeed for updating us. More, of course, as we get it. But let's just remind you now where this all started, and the claims dating back to 2 months ago, when the presenter allegedly paid a teenager £35,000 for explicit photographs.
A second young person claims they were sent threatening and abusive messages after meeting the unnamed presenter on a dating app.
The third then involving a presenter breaking COVID lockdown rules back in 2021.
The fourth revelation involves the presenter allegedly sending unsolicited messages to a young person over social media.
Well, of course, we'll update you as we get more. Just as Mark was saying, the Metropolitan Police are continuing with what they call their scoping inquiries to establish if a criminal offence has been committed. We'll update you as we get any more developments.
Earlier this hour, we saw Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden facing Deputy Angela Rayner, Keir Starmer's deputy, and that was only about half an hour or so ago. We're going to go live to Westminster now to our political reporter Olivia Utley. Well, it was the third week on the bounce, Olivia, that those two faced each other, and I'm not sure certainly that Oliver Dowden threw any punches, did he?
It was indeed. It felt like a little bit of a lacklustre PMQs all round. It felt like most of the minds in the Commons were elsewhere, whether it be with the BBC presenter or with the Prime Minister at NATO. Angela Rayner asked a series of questions about child poverty, which it seemed took Oliver Dowden a little bit by surprise. He'd been warned, presumably in advance, but perhaps it wasn't the line of questioning that he was expecting. He certainly didn't give any clear, direct response to any of her questions. And there are a couple of really clanging jokes there. He made a joke about Keir Starmer, who said that he hates tree huggers, hugging the magic money tree, which went down pretty badly in the Commons. You could see even Penny Mordaunt on the bench next to him almost rolling her eyes. Yeah, it didn't feel like there was much energy. Angela Rayner used a quite clever tactic at the beginning of pointing out that it's the first time since 1996 when a Prime Minister has missed more than 2 PMQs on the trot. So she was comparing herself to John Prescott, who was the last Deputy Prime Minister to be asking questions in that situation. Now, of course, 1996 was a year before the Labour landslide of 1997, so it felt like her sort of ulterior motive there, perhaps, was to suggest to the Commons that now the momentum is all with Labour, just as it was then. And it did work pretty well, actually, because John Prescott's line of questioning back in 1996 was all about inflation, home ownership problems, potential of people becoming homeless because of massive mortgages. And she used the phrase Tory mortgage bombshell, which sounds very much as though it had been focus grouped for Labour. So the momentum was certainly with Angela Rayner, but as I say, a bit lacklustre all round. Attention not really in the Commons today.
And interesting, that history lesson on that word bombshell, because remember the old the Tory advert, the big sort of screens about the unemployment bombshell, Labour isn't working. But I'm just sort of wondering if people are scratching their heads on all the statistics that were hit back and forth across the dispatch box, because we had Oliver Dowden asserting that there were 400,000 fewer children in absolute poverty, and then Angela Rayner saying 400,000 more children of primary school age growing up in poverty. So people will be scratching their heads at that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's a classic example of politicians using the statistics that suit them. By both, you could argue, and I've seen the stats behind it in the huddle afterwards, that both of them were right, but there are sort of different ways of measuring child poverty. The fact that there are more children in poverty in out of school as well, that's also a massive problem which wasn't addressed today, but we know that is a growing concern, and particularly really good fuel for the fire for Labour, really. But yeah, they were both sort of right, but it very much felt as though Angela Rayner pulled her punches a bit harder.
Olivia, thank you very much for that. Stay with us here on GB News. We will have the latest from the NATO summit in Lithuania. Stay with us.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. More heavy showers to come today. There'll be some blue sky at times, a fairly cool breeze continuing to blow. We've still got low pressure dominating. It's only slowly pulling away to the northeast, and around its bands of showers continually feeding in. Some heavy ones today across northern Scotland, particularly parts of Aberdeenshire down to Fife, but also parts of Northern Ireland, southern Scotland seeing some intense showers. And further south, we'll see kind of lines of showers, so some places having a very wet day, whereas some spots may not see too many and see a bit more in the way of sunshine. There's still a cool breeze blowing though, so temperatures only around or a touch below average, high teens, low 20s at best, and feeling cooler when the showers come along, of which there will still be plenty through this evening. Still some pretty lively ones, the possibility of a rumble of thunder in places, but they do tend to fade as we go through the night, so most places will become dry through the early hours. Some showers keeping going around the west. Temperatures holding up 11 to 14 Celsius. Thursday, well, it is sunshine and showers, but I don't think there'll be as many showers tomorrow. A better chance of seeing a bit more sunshine, particularly initially over central and eastern parts. But even through the day, not as many showers developing. Parts of Wales, southwest England especially, may stay dry. Still some heavy showers to come, particularly in parts of Scotland, and still generally on the cool side, although the winds will be a little lighter tomorrow.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Unnamed BBC presenter now facing 4 separate sets of allegations. One of his high-profile colleagues calling for him to come forward. The latest live from New Broadcasting House.
Former Prime Minister Liz Truss speaks to GB News about her growth commission. On the day, the Bank of England warns nearly 1 million households face a £500 rise in repayments by the end of 2026. Is it all her fault? Our economics editor Liam Halligan will be here in the studio.
The battle for the home of the dam busters and the High Court action underway. Asylum seekers are already at a neighbouring RAF base. We'll update you from the High Court.
And you'll... That and plenty more still to come. Now, though, let's get the latest headlines with Tatiana.
Pip, thank you very much and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Several high-profile figures are calling on the unnamed BBC presenter at the centre of allegations to come forward for the good of his colleagues and the corporation. A 23-year-old claims the presenter broke COVID lockdown rules to meet them during the pandemic. They told The Sun that the star travelled across London to another country to meet them at their flat in February 2021. The presenter is already facing allegations of paying another person for sexually explicit images and sending threatening messages to a young person in their early 20s. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy says he's grateful to Rishi Sunak for the UK's support in his country's NATO ambitions. He made the comments at the NATO summit a day after the NATO-Ukraine Council confirmed his country will become a member of the alliance. All members of the G7 are set to sign a long-term security arrangement with Ukraine later that Rishi Sunak says has the potential to return peace to Europe. NATO's Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg confirmed it's a huge step for the war-torn country.
Ukraine is now closer to NATO than ever before. Allies reaffirmed that Ukraine will become a member of the alliance and agreed to remove the requirement for a membership action plan. This will change Ukraine's membership path from a 2-step process to a 1-step process.
The Bank of England are warning nearly 1 million mortgage holders in the UK will see their monthly repayments jump by £500 or more by the end of 2026. Mortgage rates have now hit their highest level in 15 years, surpassing figures seen in the aftermath of last year's mini-budget. The central bank says the UK's 8 major banks are sturdy enough to handle a fresh economic crisis. It also said that the country has so far been resilient to rapidly rising interest rates, but some households and firms may struggle with repayments on loans. Now, Labour's deputy leader says the Conservative Party has crashed the economy. Standing in for Rishi Sunak at Prime Minister's questions, Oliver Dowden said the government has taken many measures to provide support to those struggling. But Angela Rayner accused the Deputy Prime Minister of being completely oblivious to the struggles of working people.
The truth is, rising bills and soaring mortgages and plummeting real wages are pushing more and more families to the brink. Those already struggling are being hit hardest by the Tory mortgage bombshell and rising food costs. So can he tell us how many primary school children have been pushed into poverty since his government took power?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I would say to the Right Honourable Lady, it is this party, not the party opposite, which extended free school meals to all 5, 6 and 7-year-olds, something the party opposite failed to do, and it sits alongside many measures we are taking to help people with the cost of living.
Teachers in England have voted in favour of strike action in their ongoing dispute over pay. Nearly 9 out of 10 teacher members of the NAS-UWT union who voted in the ballot backed the walkouts. The union, which passed the 50% ballot threshold, says it plans to stage continuous industrial action starting in September. Strike dates in the autumn term will also be considered and coordinated with other unions where possible. Lawyers for the Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich say that sanctions imposed on him by the European Union are baseless. Appearing at the European Court of Justice, lawyers for Abramovich argued that the charges against him were imposed simply because he is a famous Russian businessman. The former owner of the Chelsea Football Club was sanctioned by both the EU and the UK due to his close ties with the Russian president. And finally, parades have been taking place across Northern Ireland as Protestant loyal orders celebrate the 12th of July. The main celebrations are taking place at 18 venues, including Belfast, as well as Bangor, Codown and Ballymena. Thousands of Orange Order members, accompanied by 600 marching bands, are taking part in the festivities to mark the 333rd anniversary of the Battle of the Boyne. The Orange Order says an estimated 500,000 people are expected to take part in the celebrations. You're with GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Mark and Pip.
Look at the damage done, the words of radio host Jeremy Vine on the unnamed BBC presenter at the heart of the scandal. The number of allegations now against them rising to 4.
The presenter was suspended over the weekend while the Met Police is investigating whether a criminal offence has been committed. Our Home and Security editor Mark White can give us the latest from Broadcasting House. Good afternoon, Mark. Jeremy Vine, the latest presenter now, saying that this unnamed presenter should name himself.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very strong intervention, it has to be said, from Jeremy Vine. He tweeted last night originally to say that he believed, he's starting to believe that it might be time for this presenter to come forward and make some kind of public declaration, to speak publicly on this issue. But this morning in his programme on 5 Live, Jeremy Vine, I think, went much further. It was a very strong statement he made on that programme, very explicitly calling on his colleague now to come forward and talk publicly on an issue that he says is very damaging to the BBC. This is what he said.
It's his decision, but he needs to come forward now, I think. I know his survival instinct has kicked in, and I know he saw what happened to Philip Schofield, but my God, look at the damage to the BBC. Look at the damage to his friends, to those falsely accused, and the longer he leaves it, the worse it will be for him.
And indeed, Mark, give us an idea as to the atmosphere there. You've seen the BBC staffers going in and out at lunchtime now, of course, because Jeremy Vine also said the corporation is on its knees as a result of this.
Yeah, I mean, that's clearly his opinion. I've spoken to friends of mine who work here at the BBC, and there's mixed opinions, as you would imagine, in an institution like this with so many people who work here. There is definite anger, without a doubt, at the way that the BBC is being constantly battered by these allegations, but where Jeremy Vine believes that his colleague, this unnamed presenter, should come out and speak publicly, there are others that say he's entitled to his privacy, that none of these allegations have been tested in any way. There's still a scoping exercise on the original allegation. It was broken by the Sun newspaper last Friday to determine whether any criminality might have occurred, and if so, then we could see the potential of a criminal investigation. But they're not there yet. They're still scoping out whether to launch that investigation. And while that's happening, the internal investigations here at the BBC have been halted at the request of the Metropolitan Police. So they can't look at any of the other allegations that are being reported by the Sun newspaper and indeed by their own news division. And while that is happening, we're all in limbo, really. We can't, because of these very strict privacy laws, name ourselves, name the presenter, even if we felt that was appropriate. Clearly, the people at the centre of the allegations can't and won't be named unless any of them come forward themselves and want to speak and be in the public spotlight in that sense. So you have people here on the side of this unnamed presenter, people taking the view that Jeremy Vine takes, but most people here just thoroughly fed up of the absolute media kicking that the BBC is getting day in, day out here.
Mark, thank you for that update. Let's speak now to the BBC's former legal correspondent, Clive Coleman. Good to see you, Clive, this afternoon on GB News. Tell me, where do you stand on this? The public interest, as we know, is humongous. So is there now a point where the public interest has overtaken the law of privacy, do you think?
Okay, well, let me just do a little bit of explanation on that, because it's complex and it's a really delicate balance. Really, when the Human Rights Act came into domestic law in 2000, it set up, if you like, a battle royal between, on the one hand, the right to a private and family life that all individuals enjoy. But on the other hand, there was Article 10, the right to freedom of expression, on the other. And whenever there is a big privacy case, the judge applies what they call an intense focus to that balance between the right to privacy and the right to freedom of expression. And it's absolutely clear that what has happened so far is that every media organisation in the country has been given the same legal advice, that you do not identify, you do not publish the name of the presenter, because the right to privacy is established now in our law through a series of cases. The Cliff Richard case, which the BBC ironically was involved in, but also in another case of the Supreme Court involving the Bloomberg News organisation. It is so firmly established that if you are a suspect or involved, even identified in the early stages of a criminal investigation, you have the right to be anonymous. We've had more allegations since the original allegation. Now, the question is, does anything within those allegations raise the public interest, if you like? And we've heard reports in The Sun about allegations of breaching COVID rules. Now, all of that does go into the balance. It is when the intense focus is applied, that goes in on the public interest side. Now, I suspect that the presenter's lawyers are advising the presenter that, this is a situation in flux, and it may be that if more enters the public domain, that will embolden a news organisation. The Sun has had plenty of opportunities to identify the presenter, has chosen not to. But if more information enters the public domain, which they regard as being clearly in the public interest, then the balance could shift. Also, we saw this back in 12, 13 years ago when we had the super injunctions. Do you remember the super injunctions, Ryan Giggs and so forth? There came a point where so many people on social media were naming Ryan Giggs. An MP then got up in the House of Commons and named him. And, the more we have, sort of vacuum, the more likely it is that someone, either a parliamentarian or a news organisation, is going to be emboldened, and eventually the presenter will be named. So, of course, that is putting pressure on the presenter to name themselves.
Yeah, you'd have, of course, what's called qualified privilege as a defence from defamation if you use that information coming out in the House of Commons, quoting what the MP said. But I'm just thinking about, when does the tipping point occur? What might call it a force majeure, that when so many people know the name and it's being disseminated across social media, when is it no longer private as such?
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because, the law is very clear and it bites very hard on the mainstream media. As far as the internet's concerned and social media, then, I wouldn't call it the Wild West exactly, but there are people who clearly post on social media who either aren't aware of the law at all, or they're aware of it and they think they can flout it because they're doing it in a 140-word, 280-word tweet. To those people, I would say, be incredibly careful. Remember Sally Bercow, the Speaker of the wife of the Speaker of the House of Commons, who are in relation to a case involving Lord McAlpine. You'll remember this was a Newsnight report into child abuse at a children's care home in Wales, which didn't name Lord McAlpine, but implicated a Conservative politician from the Thatcher years. Lord McAlpine's name started then trend on social media. And Sally Bercow posted a tweet which said, "Why is Lord McAlpine trending?" And then in asterisk, innocent face. She was sued for defamation and she ended up paying very substantial damages. So you tweet, you blog at your peril. But in answer to your question, when is there a tipping point? I think it really comes down to a news organization. If it's going to be done through a news organization, then it comes down to what evidence do they have? How powerful is it? And what are the public interest arguments? It's a judgment. What I would say, though, is I think newsrooms are very nervous because every time one of these cases has come before the courts in the last few years, it has increased privacy protection. And in a way, that's what news organizations don't want. They want to be able to. Right. In the old days, we didn't have a right in UK law until 2000.
And Clive, very quickly, given all this, what is your assessment as a former BBC legal correspondent and how the BBC has coped with this? Because we've got Victoria Atkins, a Treasury Minister, saying lessons to be learned by the BBC, and we learn the DG has not even spoken directly to the presenter concerned.
Yeah, well, I think that, the BBC is going to have to scrutinise itself very carefully indeed. And if you think about, for instance, the Panorama scandal, the Martin Bashir scandal, trust is such a critical thing for the BBC. They brought in a senior retired judge to scrutinise it all. I wouldn't be surprised if in due course we have an exercise along those lines just to see what happened at each stage and, was it done properly? Was it done quickly enough? Were the right policies followed?
Clive, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Coming up next on GB News, the boss of NATO says Ukraine is closer than ever to membership. We will be discussing that very shortly. Don't go anywhere. First, here's the weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. More heavy showers to come today. There'll be some blue sky at times, a fairly cool breeze continuing to blow. We've still got low pressure dominating. It's only slowly pulling away to the northeast and around its bands of showers continually feeding in. Some heavy ones today across northern Scotland, particularly parts of Aberdeenshire down to Fife, but also parts of Northern Ireland, southern Scotland seeing some intense showers. And further south, we'll see kind of lines of showers, so some places having a very wet day, whereas some spots may not see too many and see a bit more in the way of sunshine. There's still a cool breeze blowing though, so temperatures only around or a touch below average, high teens, low 20s at best. And feeling cooler when the showers come along, of which there will still be plenty through this evening. Still some pretty lively ones, the possibility of a rumble of thunder in places, but they do tend to fade as we go through the night, so most places will become dry through the early hours. Some showers keeping going around the west. Temperatures holding up 11 to 14 Celsius. Thursday, well, it is sunshine and showers, but I don't think there'll be as many showers tomorrow. A better chance of seeing a bit more sunshine, particularly initially over central and eastern parts. But even through the day, not as many showers developing. Parts of Wales, southwest England especially may stay dry. Still some heavy showers to come, particularly in parts of Scotland, and still generally on the cool side, although the winds will be a little lighter tomorrow.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back to the live desk. Let's update you on this key meeting that's been going on in Vilnius with the NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg striking a defiant note during the news conference with President Zelenskyy, telling reporters that Ukraine was closer than ever to NATO membership and that Moscow does not get to decide who is in that alliance.
This comes a day after the Ukrainian president criticised NATO's apparent reluctance to set a timeline for his country's accession to the alliance, but struck a more conciliatory tone, saying he understands why Ukraine couldn't become a member whilst a war is raging within its borders. But how will all of this be going down in Moscow?
Let's get the thoughts of former intelligence analyst for the former Soviet states. Ewan Grant can join us. Ewan, thank you for your time once more. Indeed, I think I can probably answer our own question. Apparently, Medvedev, some suggest he's Putin's useful idiot, has basically said World War III is approaching.
Yeah.
So that's his assessment of what's happened in Vilnius.
He is the puppet of Putin. He puts out the ridiculous stuff for the Russian domestic audience. As remember, they famously said he was Robin to Putin's Batman, and it wasn't a compliment.
Yeah, however, it does indicate perhaps a line of thought in the Kremlin on this.
Well, again, they have to defend their flank, particularly because of the chaos and uncertainty over Prigozhin and Wagner. Wagner will carry on more or less as normal in Africa, of course. But there is more than that. And, of course, if you ramp the rhetoric up, in order not to seem ridiculous, you have to do something eventually, don't you? Well, that was, of course, the invasion. He did this in 2021. He couldn't get away with a bluff again, could he?
Yeah. And what do we make now of where we are with the position of Ukraine within NATO, that even though it's not actually joining, it's called an Israel-style security guarantee. No one's quite sure about what that's going to mean if, obviously, the push comes to shove.
Yes, indeed, because, of course, the crucial difference has been pointed out with Israel and its adversaries is that at the moment it has the nuclear bomb and they don't. It's frankly not much different from what the Ukrainians will privately have expected. The hints were obvious. It is more than just words, though, because ultimately when push comes to shove in the Middle East, if Israel were to disappear, then that, of course, is another example of the end of the Western order. And Ukraine is not far off that situation as well. So privately, the Ukrainians won't be too upset. The devil will be in the detail.
And what about the issue of cluster bombs, which the US is going to supply to Ukraine? The Kremlin have said they will respond if Ukraine uses cluster bombs.
Yeah, that is very clever on their part, because it will win over some of the more naive and single-minded people who say good and bad. I think they're setting up to create an alibi. They will say there's been a use, and they might do a false flag, of course. We've been hearing an awful lot about false flags, haven't we? And then they will accelerate with more missile strikes, or even conceivably deniable asymmetric attacks, more cyber, more serious cyber, including on the West, and cables. Pipelines and internet cables. But, of course, the point is their denials that they have been using them are not worth a piece of paper.
One suspects that behind the scenes in Vilnius, there'll be an assessment being made, is Russia losing?
Yeah, on all sides, including Russia's inserted friends in NATO and the Baltic states. Not that they have nearly so many of them.
What, you mean Hungary and Orban?
Yes, and also some of their sleepers in Western countries.
Tell us more.
They do. There'll be a lot of attention to internal security within NATO. Brussels, EU Brussels, has been leaky with the Russians for a long time. And, of course, although that's EU Brussels, not NATO Brussels, they're in the same city, the same restaurants, the same bars, the same hotels. So the Russians will be getting back channels, and they will have their own sources. But I think what was crucial was the way Erdogan, not Orban, because Orban is relatively small beer in comparison.
But it could still obviously be difficult in terms of getting Sweden on board fully, of course, as a new NATO member.
Indeed, yes. They don't write off Mr. Orban. He has friends. But Erdogan does seem to be looking to, if not, certainly not a Russian victory. He is hedging his bets with America. Right. He reckons Ukraine will survive, and that is obviously being noted in Moscow.
Yeah. But when you look at it geographically, especially with Sweden this week, Russia is looking increasingly isolated.
Yeah. Sweden is a game changer. That is a big arrival, technically, culturally, and geographically. The Swedes have equipment. They know how to use it.
OK, last thought, how, therefore, does that change the assessment of others in Moscow? And given, as you were saying, what's happened with Wagner and so on, are there going to be increasing threats to Putin's power base?
Not in the interim.
Right.
But, so I don't think it'll be a particularly hectic summer for him, but autumn and winter might be different.
Why do you say that?
Right. Because the longer it goes on, the more people will start to have doubts and hedge their bets.
And maybe the more successful the counter-offensive may be on the ground.
Counter-offensive in all senses, politically, economic, because I don't think it's going to make that much more progress. It's a long process.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed. We'll see what, of course, more reaction with the Prime Minister due to speak in Vilnius within the hour. So we'll find out what's happening. Thank you very much, Ewan, for your time.
Thank you. When we come back, the battle for the home of the dam busters. We are at the High Court, where local councils are trying to stop government plans to house asylum seekers at RAF bases. First, the headlines with Tatiana.
Good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Several high-profile figures are calling on the unnamed BBC presenter at the centre of allegations to come forward for the good of his colleagues at the corporation. A 23-year-old claims the presenter broke COVID lockdown rules to meet them during the pandemic. They told The Sun that the star travelled across London to another country to meet them at their flat in 2021. The presenter's already facing allegations of paying another person for sexually explicit photos and sending threatening messages to a young person in their early 20s. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy says he's grateful to Rishi Sunak for the UK's support in his country's NATO ambitions. He made the comments at the NATO summit a day after the NATO-Ukraine Council confirmed his country will become a member of the alliance. All members of the G7 are set to sign a long-term security arrangement with Ukraine later that Rishi Sunak says has the potential to return peace to Europe. The Bank of England are warning nearly 1 million mortgage holders in the UK will see their monthly repayments jump by £500 or more by the end of 2026. Mortgage rates have now hit their highest level in 15 years, surpassing figures seen in the aftermath of last year's mini-budget. The central bank says the UK's 8 major banks are sturdy enough to handle a fresh economic crisis. It also said that the country has so far been resilient to rapidly rising interest rates, but some households and firms may struggle with repayments on loans. And parades are taking place across Northern Ireland as Protestant loyal orders celebrate the 12th of July. The main celebrations are taking place at 18 venues, including Belfast as well as Bangor, Codown and Ballymena. Thousands of Orange Order members, accompanied by 600 marching bands, are taking part in the festivities to mark the 333rd anniversary of the Battle of the Boyne. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2906 and 1.1709 euros. The price of gold is £1,498.60 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,385 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
You're watching the live desk on GB News with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson. West Lindsey Council in Lincolnshire has returned to the High Court in an ongoing attempt to prevent 2,000 asylum seekers from being housed at RAF Scampton, known for previously being the home of the dam busters.
Well, that hearing determining whether the case can proceed to a full judicial review to potentially halt those plans. Our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has been updating us on the story.
For months now, no aircraft has flown in or out of RAF Scampton. But soon, hundreds of asylum seekers could start landing here. Residents like Jason live on the camp's edge. He says government proposals sideline the people living here.
It feels like we don't matter. Like nothing that we've got to say matters at all. Realistically, although they say temporary, I would guess many, many years. We would be the community that essentially picks up the pieces once they've gone.
The Home Office risks being overwhelmed by the backlog of asylum claims. In March, it announced a plan to build temporary accommodation at old military bases to accommodate thousands of migrants. One here at Scampton near Lincoln, another at Wethersfield in Essex. Local councils have hit back, claiming it's the wrong plan in the wrong place. They say that the Home Office is misusing planning legislation. Snap back to the present, West Lindsey and Braintree councils are getting their day in court. The permissions hearing today will determine whether the bigger judicial review can happen. Roger is Scampton's councillor. He says a multi-million-pound deal to develop the old Dambusters RAF base into a heritage attraction is at risk.
It's not about the asylum seekers. Everybody focuses on that to an extent. Not about the asylum seekers. It's about people's jobs, future jobs, the regeneration of everything. It's about whether we have a future ourselves as an estate or we don't have a future, which has happened at other bases. If I wasn't confident, I'd be depressed. You know, I don't want to be depressed.
In a statement, the Home Office said, delivering accommodation on surplus military sites will end the use of expensive hotels to house those arriving in small boats. We continue to work closely with the local authorities to address the local community's concerns.
Nobody's spoken to us about it. They're from the Home Office. No one. And as I said, the only response I've seen from the Home Office is to confirm that they will not speak to us face to face.
The swelling pressure on Britain's asylum system is spilling out across the country. Despite intentions, it's unknown if it will wash through here. Will Hollis, GB News, Scampton.
Our political reporter Catherine Forster joins us now. Good afternoon to you, Catherine. You are outside the High Court. Just tell us a little bit more then about this legal action. Explain it for us, because there are 3 different bids, but they're very similar.
Yes, there are. There are 3. 2 of them relate to the RAF base Wethersfield in Essex. And then the third one that we've just been hearing about from Will is RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire. Now that, of course, has the additional complication that there's supposed to be a £300 million regeneration project, putting that, because it was the Dambusters base, the Red Arrows also used to be there, and people living there say that that is at risk. So that's in addition to the concerns that they share with the residents down in Essex of the effects of putting 1,500 to 2,000 single male asylum seekers on these bases in fairly rural areas. They say they don't have the capacity, they don't have the infrastructure. These people will be free to come and go as they please. Many locals are extremely concerned about the implications of that. So this morning we were hearing the appeals relating to the site at Wethersfield in Essex. Later on, we will be hearing the one for Lincolnshire. But the KC, putting forward the case for one of the Wethersfield residents, did say that migrants have already arrived at the site in Essex today, though apparently reporters haven't seen them yet, but certainly they are going to be arriving, which then raises the question, if this request to get a judicial review is successful, what then happens to people that have already been put there?
And just to explain, regardless of the outcome of today's court appearance, they'd have to go through another process to actually get the injunction underway.
Yes, exactly. This hearing today and tomorrow is just to get permission for a judicial review that would then take as long as it would take, and then a decision would come from that. So as with all of these things, we've seen, haven't we, up and down the country, whenever the government want to put asylum seekers in military bases or wherever that's not hotels, there's a lot of local opposition, and that's the problem. Nobody seems to want these people near them, and another legal headache for the government on top of all the challenges it's currently having with its plans to get its illegal migration bill through the Houses of Parliament.
Catherine Forster outside the Royal Courts of Justice. Thank you for explaining that.
I think we're clearer, but we'll keep you updated, of course, on what happens in that case and the moves itself too on Wethersfield Airfield maybe a little bit later.
Yeah. Now, we really hate to keep saying this, but there is more bad news for homeowners as the Bank of England boss has warned of consequences of higher borrowing costs, with around 1 million mortgage borrowers expected to pay around £500 more for monthly repayments. That is just ridiculous.
Well, yeah, maybe an underestimate, some may actually believe. And it comes as a former Prime Minister, yes, Liz Truss, launched what she called a growth commission today, the project looking to revive what was her pro-growth agenda. You may remember with Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor. Britain, of course, going into a low-growth, high-tax economy, in her view, and many other economists. Let's speak to our business editor, Liam Halligan, who's been at that meeting with On the Money. Well, yeah, we haven't got the growth, certainly, that she had promised, and clearly we've got the inflation that they were saying perhaps wouldn't be quite as bad at that stage.
Lots of economic news around this morning. As you say, Pip, the Bank of England's come out with its latest financial stability report. In that report, it mentioned what we've been saying for weeks, actually, that an average family is going to be paying a lot more for its mortgage costs as they come out of those 2- and 5-year fixed-rate deals, given that interest rates have gone up. And the fact that interest rates have gone up and gilt yields have gone up, government borrowing costs have gone up, that's one reason why the former Prime Minister Liz Truss has launched this growth commission this morning. She asked me to chair that press conference, which I was pleased to do as a journalist. She's got together a dozen or so economists from around the world, British economists, some pretty high-ranking economists, it must be said, a former chief economist of the CBI, another former senior Treasury official. She's got US economists, Japanese, Indian, Latin American economists. And I think they're united by the notion that the Western world has forgot that growth is vitally important. There is still a lot of growth that we can engender. There is still a lot of technological advances. It isn't just the likes of China, India and Brazil that are going to grow fast in the next few years. And Liz Truss, after the Growth Commission report was launched, she allowed me to ask her a few questions exclusively for GB News, and here she is.
What we've seen for decades is low economic growth, and what that means is people are worse off than they need to be. Today's report shows that they are £10,000 worth off in terms of spending power than people in the United States. And it's, of course, vital that families are able to keep more of their own money, they're able to earn more money to help deal with the inevitable difficulties in life, whether it's inflation, whether it's needing to buy a new car. You know, having that extra growth is vitally important. So what this commission is looking at is what are the policies needed to get that economic growth.
Some people might say you were Prime Minister, your policies were rejected by financial markets, there was financial turmoil. What would your response be to them?
What this is about looking at the long term. We know that we've had low growth here in the United Kingdom and right across the Western world for decades. So what I'm interested in is how do we change that? How do we make our situation better?
And what would you say about the state of economic forecasting? You famously said economic forecasts aren't destiny during the leadership hustings for your party. At the core of this Growth Commission is going to be some economic modelling. Why do we need different economic modelling to what we've already got?
Well, of course, no one can predict the future. But what we do know is if we have too much regulation, if we have very high taxes, then that leads to people being less likely to go out to work, businesses being less likely to establish. And what I want to see from the Growth Commission is economic analysis that looks at that dynamic effect of those policies so that we have better economic forecasting and ultimately better policies that lead to economic growth.
The thing is, Liam, people will be watching Liz Truss there and thinking, well, hang on a minute, she was Prime Minister for all of 44 days. She and Kwasi Kwarteng caused chaos. Why the heck should we be listening to what she has to say there and taking it seriously?
Some economists would seriously dispute that account. I mean, the Bank of England started selling bonds 2 days before the mini-budget, a very controversial thing to do, throwing more government debt at the financial markets just at the time when Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng were about to announce, lower taxes and a different fiscal path. So that's highly controversial. And also, if Liz Truss wrecked the economy, why are gilt yields now higher than they were at the height of the crisis after the mini-budget? I mean, government borrowing costs are much, much higher now. Mortgages are much, much higher, even though we've got so-called sensible people. I'm just pointing the counterfactual to you. And the real thrust of what's happening here politically, right? Rishi Sunak is not going to like this. At this launch, there was Priti Patel, obviously, as former senior cabinet minister. There was Ranil Jayawardena, who is a former Minister of State under Liz Truss. And he has put together what he says is a group of 60 to 70 Tory MPs who believe in this kind of economics.
And indeed, we interviewed him here on GB News.
They don't believe in the highest tax burden in 70 years. They don't believe in frozen tax thresholds and fiscal drag. They don't believe in this notion that we've just got to not cut taxes in the run-up to the next election.
However, you will know that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt will say you're addressing the wrong issue. It's not about growth at the moment, it's about inflation. And there are economists, Panmure Gordon, of course, investment bank, saying if the Kwarteng Truss experiment would have been allowed, we'd have had even worse inflation because obviously the tax cuts would have fueled that inflation ever higher.
This is the debate, and at least there is now a debate. I don't think you can't just dismissively say now that Kwarteng and Truss wrecked the economy. I mean, you can, and Labour will, and lots of journalists will, but it's not actually... that notion can be factually, seriously challenged now, given that government borrowing costs are much higher than they were at the time of the mini-budget. And what's interesting is that Truss is attacking there, and she almost did it in that clip with me, the Office for Budget Responsibility, Whitehall forecasters, who she says are too gloomy, they're too interested in high taxation and a bigger state, they're not interested in a pro-growth agenda.
Did she talk about the Bank of England? Because one of the points you've made, obviously, is that the bank was late on parade in actually tackling inflation. Did she reflect on that aspect?
Well, she has been quite critical, not just of the OBR, but of the Bank of England. But I think Liz Truss, and certainly the members of the Growth Commission that I've spoken to, I don't think they're going to be in the business of trying to, defrock the old lady of Threadneedle Street to push Andrew Bailey out or even to change the model of independence. Because I think to do that when our finances are obviously under close...
That would really frighten the horses.
That would be seen as moving the goalposts in the middle of the game. And I certainly haven't advocated that, despite me being critical of Andrew Bailey. What I would say, though, is that I think a lot of people on the Growth Commission think that the Bank of England needs more sort of cognitive diversity, less groupthink, more people who worry that we printed too much money, who worry that one way to fix the finances of a country might actually be to grow faster and tax a bit less. It's not a particularly controversial view through history.
Thank you for your cognitive diversity, as ever, here on GB News. Thank you. OK, now, coming up, if you're heading off for school holidays, as many of you will be, well, be careful if you're heading to Italy, Sardinia, Sicily, even Greece. Record temperatures, a fierce heatwave, they say, sweeping across the southern Mediterranean.
The heatwave coming over from the Saharan desert has been named Cerberus, and it will cause temperatures in Italy to exceed 40 degrees, with Sicily and Sardinia getting the hottest, maybe even hitting 47 to 48 degrees.
Well, the record so far in Europe, 48.8 degrees, broken in 2021, also in Sicily. So could it be actually going after its own record? Joining us, weather journalist Nathan Rao is in the studio. Nathan, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
It always gets hot in summer, surprise. However, this is something completely different.
This has been named the Cerberus heatwave, the guardian of the gates to the underworld, of the Dante's Inferno, and the name is in the title, and the clue is in the title. This is hot. This is hotter than a lot of people will have been used to. Certainly Brits going, or anyone from anywhere else going to Europe on holiday. These are very, very high temperatures and unusually high temperatures.
And extreme heat that we're told that can cause heat stroke, cardiovascular or respiratory disease problems as well. This can be harmful to health.
Absolutely. I mean, we always hear during the summer when we get hot weather, even in the UK, we get people going, oh, it's only summer and oh, it's the hot weather. Everyone makes... Hot weather can kill. It can make people ill, and very hot weather like this can kill. And the NHS, when we get hot weather like this, never like this, but when we get hot weather in the UK, hydration, stay out of the sun, keep to the shade.
Just to give us a little bit of a comparison then, remember last July when it was baking and you stepped out of your house and you thought you were walking into an oven?
Yes.
And that felt horrific. So how does Can you give us some idea of how this compares, how it's even worse than that?
Absolutely.
That was awful.
Now, last July, we were seeing temperatures in the mid to high 30s, and on one day in July, we got 40.3 degrees, which is the record temperature that we've ever seen in the UK, and that was blisteringly hot. It was, I mean, I was in here, actually, on that day, and I had to sort of walk out into an oven. This is even hotter. I mean, we've got 39 degrees in Croatia, 44 degrees in Greece, 41 in Cyprus, 44 in Spain, 45 degrees in Italy, and it could get hotter. These are temperatures that people are not used to, and especially people going on holiday where there's going to be alcohol involved
exactly.
and swimming and kids and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. We're just looking at the pictures we've got. I think that's probably Rome there, and obviously, you know, they're trying to make the best of it. But, I mean, the Acropolis in Athens, we're being told the Red Cross is giving out free water. They're effectively putting tarpaulin screens up to actually shade people from the fierce heat. I mean, these are like emergency measures.
This is an emergency measures. And again, if you think of the UK, we call a heat wave here anything where we get around 25 to 28 degrees for 3 days in a row, and the overnight temperatures don't drop below 15. Now, we're looking at temperatures of 45. These are temperatures which will absolutely, you know, you'll wilt in. And we, you know, and these are people going, these are tourist spots where people are going to be out all day, having fun, not really thinking about the dangers of the heat. And we don't want to be a killjoy and ruin their holidays, but something to be very aware of.
I mean, we've got... have a look at the map. This shows us the hot spots, the mega hot spots, we should say. Just talk us through that, Nathan.
Yeah, so we've got 43 degrees in Spain. Now, Spain is at 42, 43 degrees in Spain. And then as we go further east, now this heat wave has come up from Africa. It's a high-pressure system that's come from the Sahara. So this is coming up through Europe. But you can see there, right, if you go to the southern tip of Italy, that's 36 degrees, then 38 degrees, am I seeing right there? So that's North Africa, but 34 degrees, 37. These are very, very, very high temperatures.
40 over towards Cyprus.
Yeah, 40 over
these,
and it's looking like it's going to get hotter through the week. I mean, they're looking at possibly record-breaking temperatures across Europe this week. So it really is a case of being careful.
And inevitably, the question will be asked, is this just a one-off because of some kind of plume coming out of the Sahara, or is it another indication that we've got this global warming? Global warming.
Now, the global warming debate is a huge debate, and climate change is a very multifaceted beast. It's, you know, is the climate changing? If it is it our fault? Is it due to carbon dioxide? And if it is all of those things, is there anything we can do about it? Now, in terms of the climate change issue, there is no doubt we've seen the hottest June on record in the UK. That was confirmed by the Met Office. And the first week in July was the hottest week on record. That was confirmed by the World Meteorological Organization. There is no doubt the climate is absolutely changing and getting hotter. Climate change and global warming, that comes into whether it's carbon dioxide and whether it's our fault. And we know that the World Meteorological Organization said that we're creeping towards the 1.5 degrees C above where we were supposed to be going. That was agreed in the Paris Agreement.
OK, so that debate's still going on, but what we do know is that mercury is climbing across the southern parts of Europe. And if you're going on holiday now, for school holidays, be very careful.
Have fun, but be careful and know the risks of the weather.
Nathan, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Advice. Stay with us here on GB News. We will have the very latest on the BBC presenter scandal. Plus, a senior figure at the Post Office is talking to us, telling us why they're backing the GB News' Don't Kill Cash campaign. That and much more at the top of the hour.
Window 8 will see you now.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update for GB News from the Met Office. More heavy showers to come this afternoon. If you dodge them, every now and then the sun will pop out, but it doesn't feel too warm out there thanks to a brisk breeze, low pressure continuing to dominate. And around that, we are just seeing bands of showers moving in. Now, some parts of the south haven't seen too many showers, but some places here have just seen one after another. They're kind of in lines. Plenty of slow-moving heavy showers across northern Scotland this evening, but generally through the evening, the showers will tend to fade away. Certainly a good chunk of England and Wales will become dry overnight. Northern Ireland too, and with clear skies, temperatures dipping down in rural spots, maybe even into single figures, but most towns and cities staying at 11 to 14. Tomorrow may well start fine and sunny for quite a good part of the country, but we will again see some showers developing. Now, not as many, not as widespread, not as heavy as today, but there could still be some lively ones over the Midlands, eastern England, and particularly central and northern Scotland during the afternoon. But much of Northern Ireland, Wales, southwest England, a good chance of a dry day tomorrow. A bit more sunshine, lighter winds, feeling a little bit warmer as well. Many will start the day dry on Friday, but look at this, a mass of wet and windy weather swinging up from the southwest. That is going to be unseasonably windy in the south and some pretty heavy rain to go with that wet weather too. Again, temperatures generally high teens or low 20s.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The unnamed BBC presenter now facing 4 separate sets of allegations. One high-profile colleague calls for them to come forward. We have the latest live from New Broadcasting House.
Former Prime Minister Liz Truss speaks to GB News about her growth commission. On the day, the Bank of England warns nearly 1 million households face a £500 rise in repayments by the end of 2026. But is it all her fault?
The GB News Don't Kill Cash petition passes 200,000 signatures. We'll be talking to the boss of the post office about why the pound in the pocket still matters to him.
Plus, could London even be facing water rationing? I'll get it right in a minute.
Have a drink of that.
I need something stronger than water. We'll be joined by a pressure group who is warning that a drying up of chalk streams could see the capital having to turn off the taps. First, though, your very latest headlines with Tatiana.
Pip, thank you very much and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Several high-profile figures are calling on the unnamed BBC presenter at the centre of several allegations to come forward for the good of his colleagues at the corporation. A 23-year-old claims the presenter broke COVID lockdown rules to meet them during the pandemic. They told The Sun that the star travelled across London to another country to meet them at their flat in February 2021. The presenter's already facing allegations of paying another person for sexually explicit images and sending threatening messages to a young person in their early 20s. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy says he's grateful to Rishi Sunak for the UK's support in his country's NATO ambitions. He made the comments at the NATO summit, a day after the NATO-Ukraine Council confirmed his country will become a member of the alliance. All members of the G7 are set to sign a long-term security arrangement with Ukraine later that Rishi Sunak says has the potential to return peace to Europe. NATO's Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg confirmed it's a huge step for Ukraine.
Ukraine is now closer to NATO than ever before. Allies reaffirmed that Ukraine will become a member of the alliance and agreed to remove the requirement for a membership action plan. This will change Ukraine's membership path from a two-step process to a one-step process.
The Bank of England are warning nearly 1 million mortgage holders in the UK will see their monthly repayments jump by £500 or more by the end of 2026. Mortgage rates have now hit their highest level in 15 years, surpassing figures seen in the aftermath of last year's mini-budget. The central bank says the UK's 8 major banks are sturdy enough to handle a fresh economic crisis. It also said that the country has so far been resilient to rapidly rising interest rates, but some households and firms may struggle with repayments on loans. Labour's deputy leader says the Conservative Party crashed the economy. Standing in for Rishi Sunak at PMQs this afternoon, Oliver Dowden said the government has taken many measures to provide support to those struggling. But Angela Rayner accused the Deputy Prime Minister of being completely oblivious to the struggles of working people. Now, Liz Truss says improving the UK's economic growth will help alleviate the cost of living crisis by putting more money into people's pockets. Speaking exclusively to GB News as she launched her Growth Commission, the former Prime Minister avoided taking responsibility for current economic conditions.
What this is about looking at the long term. We know that we've had low growth here in the United Kingdom and right across the Western world for decades. So what I'm interested in is how do we change that? How do we make our situation better?
Teachers in England have voted in favour of strike action in an ongoing dispute over pay. Nearly 9 out of 10 teacher members of the NASUWT union who voted in the ballot backed the walkouts. The union, which passed the 50% ballot threshold, says it plans to stage continuous industrial action starting in September. Strike dates in the autumn term will also be considered and coordinated with other unions where possible. Lawyers for the Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich say that sanctions imposed on him by the European Union are baseless. Appearing at the European Court of Justice, lawyers for Abramovich argued that the charges against him were imposed simply because he's a famous Russian businessman. The former owner of Chelsea Football Club was sanctioned by both the EU and the UK due to his close ties with the Russian president. And finally, parades are taking place across Northern Ireland as Protestant loyal orders celebrate the 12th of July. The main celebrations are taking place at 18 venues, including Belfast, as well as Bangor, Codown and Ballymena. Thousands of Orange Order members, accompanied by 600 marching bands, are taking part in the festivities to mark the 333rd anniversary of the Battle of the Boyne. The Orange Order says an estimated 500,000 people are expected to take part in the celebrations. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Mark and Pip.
And welcome back to the live desk. Look at the damage done. Those are the words of radio host Jeremy Vine on the unnamed BBC presenter at the heart of the scandal, with the number of allegations now rising to 4.
The presenter was suspended over the weekend while the Met Police investigate whether a criminal offence has been committed.
Well, in the past few minutes, we're being told that the Chief Executive of Channel 4, Alex Martin, has also joined the debate. The annual report for Channel 4 being given to journalists. She said that broadcasters need to ensure procedures are in place that would quickly flag up issues in terms of adding the name of the presenter in question and a duty of care. She replied, "It doesn't look easy, does it?" Answering questions from reporters.
Well, our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, can bring us the very latest from Broadcasting House. We've heard a lot, haven't we, Mark, today from Jeremy Vine, who thinks the unnamed presenter should name himself. It strikes some as a little bit odd, this, that he's encouraging a fellow presenter to do this.
Sorry, I missed that last bit.
I'm saying it strikes some people as a little bit odd that Jeremy Vine is encouraging a fellow presenter of his to name himself.
Well, I'm not sure how odd it is. There are a number of people here at the BBC, I think, who would back that particular stance that Jeremy Vine has taken with regard to the continuing allegations that are battering the BBC at present, the damage that is being done to the corporation because of these continued allegations, and the strange limbo that we're in because the corporation itself cannot investigate the allegations while the Metropolitan Police is scoping out the possibility of launching a criminal investigation into the first of those allegations that was splashed by the Sun newspaper on Friday. So given all that and given the drip of allegations that keep coming in and are damaging, as I say, the corporation. That's why Jeremy Vine has taken the stance that he had. He tweeted, first of all, that he was of the coming round to the belief that this presenter should perhaps come forward. Today, he absolutely was unequivocal, saying that he believes that his colleague should indeed do that. This is what he said in the Channel 5 programme that he also presents in the morning.
It's his decision, but he needs to come forward now, I think. I know his survival instinct has kicked in, and I know he saw what happened to Philip Schofield, but my God, look at the damage to the BBC. Look at the damage to his friends, to those falsely accused, and the longer he leaves it, the worse it will be for him.
Well, Mark, as you say, that was Jeremy Vine on Channel 5. Channel 4 now, we've got the Chief Executive saying broadcasters need to ensure procedures in place in terms of the whole issue about naming a person, saying it doesn't look easy, does it? Victoria Atkins, a government minister, lessons need to be learned by the BBC. Now, do we know where we are with the corporation? Clearly, they've actually suspended the investigations as such until the Met Police come back with more. But are they looking at their structure as such in result of all this?
Yeah, so the investigation that should be taking place by the BBC into the various allegations that have come to light has been halted at the request of the Metropolitan Police while they scope out the original investigation or original allegations that were made and splashed in the Sun on Friday of last week. What is still happening at the BBC as a matter of urgency is a look again at the procedures for dealing with complaints and flagging up those very serious complaints, because what we had, Mark, was, of course, this original complaint made by the parents of a young person back on the 18th of May. That got to the corporate investigations team on the 19th of May, who then emailed this family member to say just how seriously the BBC take such allegations, and was after some more information. They claimed, the BBC, that they didn't get a response to that, yet they waited 2.5 weeks before then attempting a telephone call to the complainant. That telephone call, we're told by the BBC, didn't connect, but then there was no subsequent phone calls right up until the point, the 6th of July, that the Sun newspaper contacted the BBC to say that they had this story that they would be splashing with the very next day. Only at that point was the presenter informed about the allegations that had been made, and it seems any real urgency about what the BBC was doing with regard to those allegations kicked in at that point. So yes, some very serious questions for the BBC on the procedures of dealing with complaints, which they are looking at that element, but certainly the other allegations just can't be investigated because the police have asked them not to.
Yeah, and given all that, you were outside New Broadcasting House for us yesterday and today. What have you picked up from the BBC staffers about morale? Because, of course, we had the assertion earlier that the BBC was on its knees from Jeremy Vine.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it can be a bit of an old cliche that morale is rock bottom, that kind of thing. I'm not sure that's the case, but certainly I think there is a great deal of anger at the way in which the BBC is being continually battered by these allegations and the limbo that they find themselves in the sense that they can't really do anything about it while the Met is still considering whether to launch this criminal investigation. They are coming even from the BBC's own news division, these allegations, because of course they operate independently of the management structure, and just like us and every other news outlet, they're out there chasing this story. So it's a very strange position that those within this building find themselves in, and there is a mixture of people who are very angry at the way that the BBC is being battered, people that do have an anger towards the presenter, although of course the allegations have never been tested in any way because, as I say, we're in this strange limbo.
Yeah. Mark, thank you very much indeed for updating us there outside the BBC with the latest.
How much cash have you got in your pocket today? Well, Don't Kill Cash, our GB News campaign for cash to remain legal tender, is still gaining momentum, reaching almost 210,000 signatures in just over a week. Britain is fast becoming cashless as powerful firms push to save cash handling costs and monitor what we spend.
Well, let's remind you can sign the petition at gbnews.com/cash or just slash the QR code you can see on screen, and that will take you to the petition. But let's speak now to Martin Kearsley, who's Banking Director at the Post Office, also launching partaking in this campaign, because I think probably a lot of villagers and townspeople will be very welcome for the Post Office providing, of course, cash facilities, because a lot of the holes in the wall have disappeared from their communities.
That's absolutely true, Mark, and thank you for having me on the show. Delighted to be here to support your campaign. It absolutely augments what we've been saying for a couple of years, that without bank branches, increasingly in those rural areas and areas of the country which perhaps are more urban deprived, with 5,500 bank branch closures since 2015, 500 more this year, and many more to come. Quite often, Post Office is the last counter in town. We're the last face-to-face transaction that can be done in any village. And increasingly, small businesses are turning to the Post Office to bring us their cash, bank it safely and securely into their bank account.
How much cash does the Post Office handle, and have you seen a drop in that in recent years?
On the contrary, Pip, we've actually seen it grow significantly over the past few years. When COVID struck, I think we and many in the industry thought that cash would start to go down and would probably not recover. We've been proved wrong. And I think two reasons for that. The first is those bank branch closures, which means more people come to the Post Office. So we've seen the cash in our network grow significantly. Around about 3.5 billion every month is transacted through a post office. And I think the second main cause is the cost of living crisis. More and more, increasingly, families, vulnerable, perhaps more rural citizens who can't get a reliable Wi-Fi signal, perhaps, are returning to cash, especially because once it's spent, it's spent. It's a very, very controllable budgeting tool. And in hard-pressed times, that's why we're seeing a significant growth in both cash withdrawals, as well as I say, those cash deposits back in again.
Yeah, and is there evidence, too, of the demographic being affected? One assumes perhaps it is the older generation that's more comfortable with dealing with cash, and the very important process, I guess, of actually going into a counter and having a transaction with a human individual, and maybe, you know, that social support that is there as well.
I think that is hugely important, Mark. Absolutely. I think that face-to-face element, especially if you're a small business and you've worked hard to earn your several £1,000s each week, you probably don't want to go and deposit it into a machine. Increasingly, that may become available over the years to come. But for right now, there is something very reassuring about giving it to somebody, looking at the whites of their eyes, having a conversation about how your business is going this week, and talking to a fellow retailer, and then walking out with a receipt, knowing that your money is safe.
But of course, in many villages, they don't actually have a post office now, do they, Martin? Which, for many people, is, you know, just such a crying shame and such a loss.
I think it's worth pointing out that since 2009, our network has been largely stable. We operate about 11,500 branches across the country, pretty much in any village, any small provincial town, and in major towns and locations, there is a post office. And we do have a churn every year, there's no doubt. We are under pressure like never before, commercially, as well as being able to support our postmasters and make a viable living. But every one of myself and my colleagues, we're working hard to make those postmasters be able to stay open on the high street. And with that stability of the network, we are actually the only network that continues to open new branches whenever we can. So if we are forced to close on, we look for a new operator, a new partner who's prepared to take us on in that town.
And where are you on this debate about legal tender? Because we'd always assumed that, you know, your £5 note, your £10 note, that's legal tender. It has to be accepted. And yet people are saying, you know, when that cash is rejected at another sort of circumstance, they're really left high and dry.
I think there's two different debates there, Mark. The definition of legal tender, you're right, can sometimes be blurred into a sort of an obligation that people must accept it. It isn't, and that's not the case. So legal tender just means it's a legal representation of the money that is at the bank.
Right, so it could be accepted if they wish to do so.
Absolutely, and we encourage all of our postmasters, all of our post offices, that every bit of tender that is in the country we will take. So that's coins as well as notes.
And Martin, do you still carry cash around with you? I won't ask how much cash you've got on you currently. That might be a little bit cheeky, but have you got some cash in your pocket?
I've always got some cash. I've always taken it out from the post office.
That is very good to know.
And perhaps even if you're heading abroad, of course, as well, let's not forget, you know, taking cash abroad sometimes can be a bit cheaper than using your card with all the charges that you get hit for as well.
Well, give you a final plug for one of our products. The Travel Money Card is available in every post office. It's online rechargeable should you be abroad and run out of cash that you put onto it. And it offers no charges when you're abroad. So it's a very useful travel accompaniment.
Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us here in GB News. And, of course, we'll update people as to the number of signatories on that petition as well. Thank you very much indeed.
I hope he signed it, Martin. Sounds like he will have done.
I think the producers will be checking now before he leaves.
You're watching at the live desk on at GB News with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson. When we return, what are NATO going to do about Ukraine, despite Ukraine's being desperate to join the alliance? All that to come very soon. Stay with us.
That warm feeling inside. From boxed boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update for GB News from the Met Office. more heavy showers to come this afternoon. If you dodge them, every now and then the sun will pop out, but it doesn't feel too warm out there thanks to a brisk breeze, low pressure continuing to dominate, and around that we are just seeing bands of showers moving in. Now, some parts of the south haven't seen too many showers, but some places here have just seen one after another. They're kind of in lines. Plenty of slow-moving heavy showers across northern Scotland this evening, but generally through the evening the showers will tend to fade away. Certainly a good chunk of England and Wales will become dry overnight, Northern Ireland too, and with clear skies, temperatures dipping down in rural spots, maybe even into single figures, but most towns and cities staying at 11 to 14. Tomorrow may well start fine and sunny for quite a good part of the country, but we will again see some showers developing. Now, not as many, not as widespread, not as heavy as today, but there could still be some lively ones over the Midlands, eastern England, and particularly central and northern Scotland during the afternoon. But much of Northern Ireland, Wales, southwest England, a good chance of a dry day tomorrow. A bit more sunshine, lighter winds, feeling a little bit warmer as well. Many will start the day dry on Friday, but look at this, a mass of wet and windy weather swinging up from the southwest. That is going to be unseasonably windy in the south, and some pretty heavy rain to go with that wet weather too. Again, temperatures generally high teens or low 20s.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back to the live desk. Now, Ukraine's President Zelenskyy is perhaps a little bit more cheerful today after being told by NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg that Ukraine is closer than ever to NATO membership and that Moscow does not get to decide who joins the alliance.
But interesting that there's an equally defiant message from our Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, who appears to suggest that President Zelenskyy needs to be mindful about keeping doubting politicians in the US on side, following what might have been seen as critical remarks about NATO membership. Mr. Wallace saying some allies providing defensive aid to Kyiv want to see gratitude, he said. Well, let's speak now to People's Deputy in Ukraine, Andriy Ossadchuk, who can join us once more. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I know also that your defence minister was also saying that the so-called Israeli-style guarantees that have been offered, they want to see more detail. So there's a little bit of sensitivity about this.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. Yes, the topic is pretty sensitive. Yes, for the last months before the NATO summit, Ukraine raised the bar in our international agenda, and we believe that we have the right to raise the bar. One simple reason that we are doing for the last 16 months the job which is supposed to be done by NATO, that in fact the job for which NATO was created in late 40s of the 20th century. But we also are absolutely pragmatic, being understand that no one in the West is ready to die for us or even ready to be injured for us. So that's why we focused on one simple thing, that first, we definitely need to win the war. And for that, we really need the resources. For that, we need the NATO allies to pay for this. And the second option is definitely we need to create such an architecture of security and safety which will not allow this nightmare to be repeated in future. And definitely there is no alternative for the moment to NATO for such infrastructure, for such an architecture of security. Yes, we probably expect a little bit more from this summit in Vilnius. And yes, if to be very honest with you, if to put aside all details which are important, but the summit was still about a fair of Russia, but this fair was wrapped in intelligence, in good manners, in pragmatism. And yes, we expect that all agreements which Zelenskyy and our team achieved today will help to speed up the end of this nightmare in Ukraine. But at the same time, we all here understand that none of the safety guarantees can be accepted by Ukraine in exchange of NATO membership. There is no alternative, neither for us, and we believe for NATO, for Ukraine to be part of the NATO family, if we're really worried about long-term peace and security in the European continent.
Do you accept that it would be folly for Ukraine to join NATO while the war is still ongoing?
That's one of the big achievements of this NATO summit. And if you look carefully at the wording of communique...
I do apologise. I'm just going to interrupt you because President Biden is literally speaking in Vilnius at the moment. I'm sure you'll want to hear what he's got to say as well. Let's cross to Lithuania. It's just coming up for you now.
Of stability in the region and deter against any and all threats. I want to thank my fellow G7 leaders and President Zelenskyy for their work to make this happen. I think it's a powerful statement of our commitment to Ukraine as it defends its freedom today and as it rebuilds the future. And we're going to be there as long as that takes. And again, I thank all my colleagues for their support for this.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, President Biden, Prime Minister Kishida, Chancellor, see you, Chancellor Scholz, Prime Minister Sunak, President Macron, Prime Minister Trudeau, Prime Minister Meloni, President Michel, President von der Leyen. great honor to be here. The outcome of the NATO summit in Vilnius is very much needed and meaningful success for Ukraine. And I'm grateful to all leaders in NATO countries for very practical and unprecedented support, considering decades of our relations support for Ukraine. Today, there are security guarantees for Ukraine on the way to NATO, an important package of security guarantees. Today, we are coordinating with the G7 countries the framework for security guarantees that shall be further extended through arrangements with our key partners, bilateral and multilateral agreements. And Ukrainian delegation is bringing home significant security victory for the Ukraine, for our country, for our people, for our children. It opens for us absolutely new security opportunities, and I thank everyone who made it possible. Thank you, dear colleagues. Thanks you, thanks Lithuania and Jens Stoltenberg. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini.
This concludes the speaking program. Please remain seated for the family photo.
Significant that the family photo may well include President Zelenskyy. We'll wait and see. But certainly thanks there from President Zelenskyy and an indication from President Biden that this will be taking as long as it takes. So clearly a commitment, even though we've still not got this full NATO membership. Let's return to Andriy Osachuk, who was just speaking to us before that. Again, apologies for interrupting, but clearly you wanted to hear from your own president and President Biden as well. I think an indication there as to the, I think they call it the pathway, or the way they want to go with this. You know, commitments perhaps have been made behind the scenes.
Look, I'm happy that I'm talking with the same tone of voice as President Biden and President Zelenskyy. As I said in the very beginning in our interview, that our target is to win the war. NATO membership is just a tool, but just with the even judicial signing of any documents, it will not mean that it will help us to win the war immediately. We need the weapons, we need ammunition, we need that, all that in huge quantities, because daily we spend huge resources. And if I understood correctly, Biden and Zelenskyy, today, Ukraine reached an agreement with the G7 on, as they call it, security guarantees.
Yep.
But talking in a simple language, we receive insurance on providing military support as long as it will be needed, as long as it will take. The only thing I don't really like this wording created by Biden more than a year ago, because I want the United States and our allies to stay with Ukraine, not as long as it takes, but as long as it takes to win the war by Ukraine. But I think all our members are participants of this meeting. In fact, they were talking about joint rebuild of Ukraine, meaning that we are talking about future of Ukraine, which is possible only after the victory of Ukraine, meaning that I accept all that everyone is agreed that the only way for us to forward this process is Ukrainian victory. And the West will do all possible to reach that.
And how pleased were you, Andrei? We're just seeing pictures now, actually, of Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, a bit of a photo call of all the member countries lining up after making this declaration.
And we can tell you that Zelenskyy is next to President Biden for that family photo. How significant is that? Andrei, can you hear us? Well, we'll just bring Andrei in, but that is a significant moment there, that President Zelenskyy seen next to President Biden at what they call the family photo. So even though technically not a member of NATO, certainly he's been brought in as, well, perhaps a favourite cousin, should we say. Andrei Osachuk can join us once more. Andrei, we're just saying that the family photo has just been taken with President Zelenskyy standing next to President Biden.
Very important. It simply confirms that Ukraine de facto the member of NATO. In fact, Ukrainian army for the moment probably is the most trained and most advanced army, even comparing to United States Army, because we have the highest level of combat experience. And I'm sure that it is big interest and it will be a big value for the NATO when Ukraine will join the NATO club, because we will be an example for all NATO countries, for all NATO military, how to fight, how to protect yourself. We will have absolutely exclusive experience, which we will be happy to share with everyone, with NATO, for one simple reason: not to repeat this experience in future by any other NATO armies and NATO countries. So that's why Zelenskyy was standing in very right place, in very right company.
Yeah, and how do you think Putin will be reacting when he sees those pictures, when he sees that lineup, and he sees President Zelenskyy standing next to the American president? I mean, what a message is that sending to him?
I think we shall not be very much worried about his thought. For the last 16 months, Russian Federation was putting a lot of, as they said, red lines. But all these red lines was crossed as by Ukraine, as by our allies, dozens of times. Putin policy fully collapsed, fully collapsed. He is extremely bad strategist. He got absolutely opposite results for his country and for his political career. So yes, they'll be very disappointed. Yes, they will continue to threat the West. They will continue to attack Ukraine. Nothing new. We shall not look at Kremlin at all. We shall do our job, and we shall think only about one thing: that duration of this war is directly linked to the readiness and bravery of the West to fight together with Ukraine.
And on that note, I know Zelenskyy has said that, you know, progress is slow, and you can understand why. But what is your understanding of how the counteroffensive is going and what it's achieving on the ground at the moment?
Counteroffensive is possible only if we have at least parity with Russian Federation on troops and ammunition. Unfortunately, now it's not the secret, and we can speak openly about that last year it was huge delays with the supply of ammunition and military equipment to Ukraine. These delays was paid by thousands of people being killed. Now the situation is a little bit better, but still it's not the secret that for the last 40 years, none of NATO military campaign was conducted without strong air force or without long-range missiles. That still a lot of equipment is not in place in Ukraine. So that's why it's very unfair to demand huge progress from Ukrainian military, at the same time not providing Ukraine with everything needed. I hope that this NATO summit will put a final point in this discussion, and Ukraine will finally receive everything which will give us a chance to finish this war.
I'm sure those conversations were held behind the scenes there in Vilnius. But Andrea Ozchuk, thank you very much for joining us and witnessing, of course, those historic scenes, your president actually standing next to Joe Biden there in Vilnius. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Still to come on GB News, we are at the High Court, where a Lincolnshire council is trying to stop the government sending asylum seekers to the former base of the Dam Busters. We'll bring you the latest very shortly. Welcome back to the Live Desk. West Lindsey Council in Lincolnshire has returned to the High Court today in an ongoing effort to prevent 2,000 asylum seekers from being housed at RAF Scampton, known for previously being the home of the dam busters.
Well, the hearing to determine whether the case can proceed to a full judicial review, which may halt the plans. Catherine Forster joins us from outside the High Court. And it's a sort of triple whammy, I guess, Catherine. 3 incidents in one. And this hearing before there's a hearing for the injunction. There's a long way to go in this process yet.
Yes, absolutely. And as we've seen again and again, with all things connected to migrants, there are always multiple legal battles. So this triple hearing, as you say, against migrants being allowed to be placed in 2 former RAF bases in Wethersfield in Essex and in Scampton in Lincolnshire, are just to get permission to have a judicial review, which would be a further legal wrangling, which might or might not then block these people arriving. But it was announced today by the KC leading the first of these appeals for the base in Wethersfield in Essex, that in fact some migrants had already arrived on site. Now, reporters down there haven't seen anybody as yet, but certainly they are arriving imminently if they're not already there. And that site particularly could house up to 1.7 thousand male migrants, and in RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire, of course, the home of the dam busters during the war, that site could potentially house 2,000. Now, the local authorities are absolutely up in arms. They feel that the government are playing fast and loose with them. They say they haven't been properly consulted. They say that the planning laws that are being used, these temporary permanent development rights, are not appropriate because they're only supposed to be for short periods of time. The government are not clarifying how long they might use these bases for, and real concerns about the pressure on local services, on doctors, on hospitals, on schools. Also, these are very rural environments, and having large numbers of male migrants dropped into these rural communities understandably makes people uneasy. But this is the problem, isn't it? Wherever the government wants to put migrants, the locals do not want them there. And meanwhile, we're spending £6 million a day on hotel bills. And as we found out yesterday, £500,000 a day for hotel rooms that aren't even occupied, that the government just needs to have in case there's a sudden huge rise in numbers crossing the channel.
This is a recurring theme, though, isn't it, Catherine, about lack of consultation? I mean, we hear the same thing about the barge that's moving any time now into Portland. And the problem is that people think, this is so unfair because the government could have tackled this issue a long time ago and they've just made such little progress.
Yes, indeed. And of course, Rishi Sunak made it one of his 5 pledges, didn't he, at the beginning of the year, stop the boats. Only a couple of months ago, he was saying, look, my plan is working. The numbers are down 20%. But as we've seen now, judged against where we were last year, the numbers are pretty much the same coming across the channel. And the plans to Rwanda, well, nobody is yet to get on a plane, are they? And of course, there's a battle going on now in Parliament. The House of Lords making numerous amendments to the government's illegal migration bill. There were 4 hours of voting on that last night. The government did make some concessions. It's going back to the Lords now. But basically, whatever the government tries to do to combat this problem, they seem to just get mired in controversy, in legal battles. And meanwhile, stopping the boat seems to be a very, very long way off.
Catherine Forster outside the High Court, thanks very much for that update. Now, what could be bad news for us again, because UK homeowners could face monthly mortgage payment hikes of around £500. I know, not what any of us want to hear. That's come from the Bank of England in their latest financial stability report.
Well, it also comes as Liz Truss, yes, remember her, launched something called the Growth Commission today. It's a new project hoping to revive her pro-growth agenda, along with Kwasi Kwarteng. Remember when he was Chancellor, our economics and business editor, was at that launch. In fact, he had a central role. So here's Liam with On the Money.
Not me, Gov.
What was your central role then? Tell us more.
So I know a lot of the economists on the Growth Commission. There are about a dozen economists from around the world. Brits, Americans, Japanese economists, Indian economists, Latin American economists. And they asked me just to chair their debate as they launched their first Growth Commission report. Look, we'll come back to the Bank of England in a minute, but the politics of what's going on here is Liz Truss is basically trying to rally the troops, not because she wants to become Tory leader or Prime Minister again. I think she realises that ship has sailed. But because she wants some representation for the many, many Conservative MPs and many, many voters who think that a tax burden at a 70-year high, endless freezing of tax thresholds, fiscal drag, lots of people paying tax at the higher rate, isn't necessarily what people want. She wants to make sure that an agenda is kept going where we have people arguing that actually if we lower tax we can get more growth going, grow the pie in order so there's more money for public services. It's a set of views that historically stand up but that have gone out of fashion in recent years.
Yeah, and of course the big problem is that may be something a government wants to do, but we've got the Bank of England putting the brakes on the economy. They don't want the growth at the moment because of the inflation issue. So one wonders, even if she was able to regain some kind of political traction, the Bank of England is there saying, no, we've got to stop this happening because inflation is sticky, is this phrase they keep using.
You know what? The Bank of England has been a long way behind the curve for quite a long time. They were really slow to see inflation coming. Some of us saw inflation coming months and months before they did. They were really slow to start raising interest rates. And I would argue now, Pip, that they're too slow to stop raising interest rates, because I would say that inflation is actually going to come down quite soon. So while the Bank of England is right on current trajectories, as people come off lower 2- and 5-year fixed rate deals and suddenly they're exposed to much higher market interest rates, you know, the average mortgage rate is now about 6.5% as opposed to 2.5%, 3% a year ago. Incredible. Then more people will be paying more on their mortgage. But I don't think the numbers are going to turn out quite as bad as the Bank of England is warning in that latest financial stability report.
I was also reading some analysts saying that the government was suggesting, you know, going on to an interest-only mortgage, you could end up paying less a month. But some analysts are now saying, no, we've almost reached a tipping point and it's not really going to help you going on to an interest-only mortgage.
It depends where you fix that interest-only rate. If you fix now, I would say you're fixing near the peak of interest rates. I would, if you can stand it, I would wait until interest rates are unequivocally, definitely coming down. But look, going back to Liz Truss, I do think she's kind of earned the right to be heard again, because the government borrowing costs are now higher than they were when she did her mini-budget with Kwasi Kwarteng, which was blamed for, quotes, trashing the economy. Actually, the government's in a worse state now. The government's paying more for its borrowing.
Is there a thinking that her mini-budget then, long-term, would work?
I think there's thinking among a lot of economists. She won't get much... you know, the Labour Party won't agree, and quite a lot of the Tories' own backbenchers won't agree. But I think there's thinking for quite a lot of people, quite a lot of economists and people in financial markets, that at least she was asking the right questions. She was trying to free up the supply side of the economy. She was trying to get efficiency. She was trying to, you know, get her arms around government spending rather than just spending and borrowing more. And she made all these points when I asked her earlier, exclusively for GB News, why we need this Growth Commission.
What we've seen for decades is low economic growth, and what that means is people are worse off than they need to be. Today's report shows that they are £10,000.
Cut her short, but let's just reflect that, you know, she's sticking to that script. But let's reflect that within the past day or two, Jeremy Hunt, the current Chancellor, said no tax cuts at the moment. We've still got to bear down on inflation. So you've got, I think, hold your nerve is a phrase the government keeps using, of course.
And this is why what she's doing is politically so potent. She was very careful to not be up on stage at that Growth Commission launch. She sat in the crowd. She didn't say anything. She didn't raise her hand to ask a question or anything like that. Yeah. She only spoke to me afterwards. She didn't give a general interview because she knows this is politically really, really punchy what she's doing. Not only, as you say, Mark, because the Bank of England doesn't want to hear about growth at the moment. It just wants to hear about bearing down on inflation. But, you know, economics changes quickly. I would say in the coming weeks, we could soon be looking at inflation falling and people once again talking about interest rates maybe going up once more, but not 2 or 3 times more from 5% where they currently are at the Bank of England all the way up to 6.5%. I don't see that. I think there'll be another rate rise to 5.25% or 5.5% on the 3rd of August. But I think pretty soon the numbers are going to start showing that inflation is falling quite sharply. And then the whole economic debate could start to shift.
OK, and let's talk about that when we talk about tax cuts. I mean, we're assuming, you know, it could be a lot more nuanced, not just, you know, a couple of pence in the pound off your marginal rate, but the tax allowances, the tax bans that you've talked about, which has been hitting a lot of middle earners who suddenly become higher tax rate earners. So it's hitting particular parts of the population.
Exactly. We call it fiscal drag. When you're dragged into higher tax brackets, as wages and prices go up, if the tax bracket stays where it is, for instance, 12.5 grand, below that, you don't pay income tax. You know, 50 odd grand above that, you pay, you know, 40% rather than 20%, the basic rate of income tax. As those tax bans are frozen, and Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak between them have frozen them until 2028.
Talking of Rishi Sunak, we're just going to break away because let's take it live to Vilnius, the Prime Minister talking.
We arrived here faced with a more volatile and dangerous world. A mechanised war in Europe on a scale not seen since 1945. And increasing aggression from authoritarian states challenging our security in Europe and beyond. But as we leave Vilnius, we are more confident and more united than ever. And let me set out 3 reasons why this is the case. First, we've acted decisively to strengthen this alliance, agreeing the most fundamental transformation to NATO's readiness since the Cold War. Comprehensive warfighting plans to defend the UK and its allies. Scaled up defence production to boost our stockpiles, which will benefit British industry. And increase defence spending, with all allies now committed to hitting the 2% target. And we did something here in Vilnius that not long ago seemed impossible. We welcomed Finland to the table as a NATO member, and very soon we'll be doing the same with Sweden. We are stronger with them by our side, and in time we will be stronger with Ukraine as a NATO ally too. And this is my second point. It is now over 500 days since Russia's invasion. 500 days of barbarity, of innocent people being murdered in their homes, of children being killed, abducted, and used as human shields. I want to pay tribute to the Ukrainian people and to their incredible bravery and resilience. They're still standing strong and defiant, and the counteroffensive is making progress. In the last few weeks, they've taken back more ground than Russia has taken in the last year. And we are standing with them, and allies are doubling down in their support. At the Munich Security Conference in February, I called for long-term security arrangements to protect Ukraine, break the cycle of Russian violence, and ultimately help end this war. And today, we have delivered. Together with our G7 partners, we have agreed to provide the long-term bilateral security commitments that Ukraine needs. These commitments mark a new high point in international support for Ukraine. And I want to be clear, they are not a substitute for NATO membership. The summit communiqué echoes the UK's long-held position that Ukraine's future is in NATO. And we've taken a big step this week towards bringing Ukraine into the alliance. Together, we've shortened their path to membership, removing the need for a membership action plan, and holding the first meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council with President Zelenskyy sitting at the table by our side as an equal. And finally, I'd like to say a word about the UK's role here. I was struck once again this week by just how valued our contribution is. The British people should know that, and they should be proud. We are the leading European contributor to NATO. We were one of the first to hit the 2% target, and now we're moving towards 2.5%. We spend more than 20 other NATO countries combined, but it's about much more than that. It's about our incredible armed forces across land, air, and sea. We're one of the only countries that contributes to every NATO mission, with RAF jets patrolling the eastern flank, troops on the ground in Estonia and Poland as part of NATO's enhanced forward presence, and the Royal Navy, including our 2 aircraft carriers, providing around a quarter of NATO's maritime capability. It's about our deep partnerships. With Japan and Italy, we're producing a 6th-generation fighter through our Global Combat Air Programme. And with AUKUS, we're working with Australia and the US to build some of the most advanced nuclear-powered submarines the world has ever known. And it's about leadership. We've led the way on Ukraine, moving first on tanks and long-range missiles, training their troops for the counter-offensive. And just today, I've announced we're providing more ammunition, 70 more combat vehicles, as well as a new rehabilitation center for injured Ukrainian veterans. We're moving forward with the Combat Air Coalition, and the UK starts training Ukrainian pilots next month. And we're using our leadership and technology to keep NATO at the cutting edge, hosting the European headquarters of the Defence Innovation Accelerator in the UK, and holding the first global summit on AI safety later this year. The United Kingdom has been there since the start of this alliance. In 1948, in the hope of avoiding another devastating war, we joined together with a handful of allies to pledge that we would come to one another's defence. That pact was the seed of the North Atlantic Treaty. 75 years later, faced with new threats in Europe, NATO is more important than ever. It has proved itself to be the most successful alliance in history. And this week, we've shown once again that the UK is at its heart. Thank you. We'll take some questions from the media. If I could start with the BBC, please.
Thanks very much, Prime Minister. Ben Wright from the BBC. Do you agree with your Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, that people want to see a bit of gratitude from Ukraine for the military help they're getting from the West? And closer to home, will government departments have to make cuts elsewhere to fund higher pay rises for public sector workers?
Well, President Zelenskyy has expressed his gratitude for what we've done on a number of occasions, and not least in his incredibly moving address that he made to Parliament earlier this year, and he's done so again to me, as he has done countless times when I've met him. So I know he and his people are incredibly grateful for the support the UK has shown, the welcome that we've provided to many Ukrainian families, but also the leadership that we've shown throughout this conflict, as I mentioned, often being the first to move support forward, whether it was with the provision of tanks or indeed long-range weapons. And I'd say he's enormously grateful for that. But people across Ukraine are also fighting for their lives and freedom every single day, and they're paying a terrible price for it. So I completely understand Volodymir's desire to do everything he can to protect his people and to stop this war, and we will continue to give him the support that he needs. With regard to public sector pay, what I've said previously is that we'll be guided by a couple of principles. The first is fairness. Fairness for our public sector workers, because we want to make sure that they're rewarded fairly for their hard work, but also fairness for taxpayers, who ultimately have to foot the bill for pay rises. And the other thing we'll be guided by is responsibility. I think everyone knows the economic context that we're in, and we need to make sure that government decisions, particularly when it comes to not borrowing more, are made responsibly so that we don't fuel inflation, make it worse, or last for longer. So those are the things that we'll be guided by: fairness and responsibility. Can I turn next to Sky News?
Thank you, Prime. Just quickly following up on Ben Wallace's remarks, he also likened NATO allies to being like Amazon giving delivery of weapons and protections for the Ukrainians. Are you worried that that might offend President Zelenskyy, who you have a good relationship with? And just following up on President Zelenskyy and your talks today, you talked clearly about full NATO membership in the future. Once this war is over, do you think that accession will happen quickly in the way, the sort of timeline that it did with Finland and now Sweden? So how quickly do you see that membership happening? And you've had a very successful summit, but back home it's tough. You're 20 plus points behind in the polls. You could face 3 by-election defeats next week. And all of your 5 pledges are in doubt. Now, you're a Prime Minister who doesn't like to promise what he cannot deliver. Are you beginning to worry that you have over-promised domestically and that you could be punished at the ballot box, not just next week, but in a general election too? Thank you.
So with regard to NATO membership, actually I think this summit has been, as I said, a very important moment, because you had the alliance affirming unequivocally that Ukraine's rightful place is in NATO and Ukraine will become a member of NATO. That's something that the UK has said. It was great that the alliance has echoed that position. And we saw at this summit meaningful progress on that path towards eventual membership. You've seen the removal of the membership action plan, as the Secretary General described it. That's turned the process from a 2-step process into a 1-step process, recognising what has already happened. You've seen the Comprehensive Assistance Programme be supported, and that will provide support to Ukraine. But also, what you've seen is Ukraine sitting alongside me and other allies in the first meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council. These are very significant moments along Ukraine's journey to membership, and all of that was complemented by the declaration from the G7 allies to provide long-term multilateral security guarantees, something that, as I said, I spoke about in February at the Munich Security Conference. And I'm highly confident that very quickly what you will see is other countries signing up to that same pledge. It won't just be the G7, it will be others. And if you take all of that together, I think what you've got is, actually President Zelensky's words are probably better than mine to describe it, but he's just described it and by saying that the outcome of the Vilnius summit is a meaningful success for Ukraine, and that he is bringing home significant security victory for Ukraine, for his country and for its people. Those are President Zelensky's words about what this summit has achieved for him and for its people. And I'm very proud, and everyone should be very proud, that the UK has had a leading role to play in that outcome. And with regard to your other question, Ben, all I'd say is, look, I am absolutely laser focused on delivering for the British people. You know, their priorities are my priorities. Halving inflation, because that's the best way that we can ease the burden on them and the cost of living. Cutting waiting lists, because it's wrong that people have to wait as long as they are currently, and about stopping the votes, because that's about simple fairness.
OK, so that is, of course, Rishi Sunak at the NATO summit. It is 3:05. This is Patrick Christie's, and this is GB News. Big hour coming your way. The BBC scandal, I think we're all wondering, what next, aren't we? The BBC appears to be in civil war. I will take you live to New Broadcasting House in just a couple of seconds' time. In other news, though, is it time now to have mandatory age tests for anybody coming across the channel? Our immigration minister seems to think so. Not before time, if you ask me. In other news, I'm going to be talking a lot as well, of course, about NHS. Take a look at this. You're in the NHS, you're full of illness, etc., and then they try to pump you full of spaghetti hoops. We're having a look at the state of NHS food. I'm also going to be talking about this. A terrorist link to the Manchester Arena bombing could well be out very, very shortly. Madness on the streets of Britain. Patrick Christie's, GB News. Look, loads to go on today. GB Views at gbnews.com. I am going to go straight away, of course, to Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, who is outside New Broadcasting House for us as the BBC